Hi guys! Tonight we were going to travel farther back than almost any bedtime history journey can comfortably reach, to a time around 80,000 years ago, long before streets, kingdoms, farms, temples, writing, or even the quiet idea of a village square existed. You are standing beneath a vast evening sky, where the last light settles across open grassland, scattered trees, and a distant ridge of dark stone. The air is cooler than you expect. Smoke drifts from a small fire nearby, carrying the dry smell of wood, ash, and something faintly roasted behind you. Animal hides shift in the breeze beside a shallow shelter of rock and brush. Somewhere beyond the firelight, an animal calls once, then falls silent. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there now. Dim the lights, and imagine that the familiar world has disappeared. There are no roads beneath your feet. No fences mark the landscape. No electric glow rests on the horizon. No aircraft blink overhead. There is no traffic. No church bell, no farmhouse window, no railway, and no sign pointing toward the nearest settlement. Around 80,000 years ago, human life existed in small, mobile communities scattered across parts of Africa and Eurasia. Homo sapiens already existed, while other human populations, including Neanderthals, occupied parts of Europe and Western Asia. The world is not empty. But compared with the world you know, it feels almost impossibly quiet. You would not think of yourself as living before civilization. That phrase belongs to people much later. To you, this landscape is simply home. Your group may contain a few dozen people, perhaps fewer at certain times. Researchers continue to debate how large prehistoric communities typically were. But survival clearly depended on cooperation. Food must be found, children must be watched, tools must be repaired, fire must be maintained, water must be remembered, and memory, in this world, is a kind of map. You know where rainwater gathers between rocks. You know which trees produce edible fruit. You know where animals cross the valley. You know which patches of ground hide useful roots. You know which stones split cleanly enough to create sharp edges. None of this information is written down. Knowledge lives inside people. An older companion may remember a distant spring that remained wet during a dry season. Someone else may recognize clouds that suggest changing weather. Another person may know how to strike stone at precisely the right angle so that a sharp flake separates from the core. These skills feel ordinary here. They are anything but simple. Modern images have often reduced prehistoric life to something crude, as though early humans spent their days wandering around cold landscapes while occasionally hitting things with rocks. Archaeology paints a more interesting picture. Stone tool traditions demonstrate planning, repetition, judgment, and experience. Some techniques required several steps to prepare a stone core before the desired flake could even be removed. You crouch beside the fire and pick up one of those flakes. It is surprisingly sharp. The thin edge catches the orange light. Someone created it deliberately. It may not resemble a modern knife, but it can cut hide, trim wood, slice plant material, and help prepare food. A lesser-known detail is that prehistoric people did not always use whatever stone happened to be lying nearby. In many regions, certain raw materials were preferred because they fractured predictably and produced better cutting edges. Good stone could be valuable enough to carry over considerable distances. You turn the flake carefully between your fingers. Suddenly, 80,000 years ago feels less like a vague prehistoric fog and more like an ordinary evening filled with choices. Morning still became afternoon. People still became hungry. Children still became tired. Someone probably dropped something useful. Someone may have laughed. Someone may have become irritated because another person used the best piece of wood for the fire. Human nature, after all, didn't wait politely for civilization to arrive. The emotional lives of prehistoric people are much harder to recover than their stone tools. Yet their communities were clearly more than collections of individuals struggling to survive. They depended on one another, and the environment constantly reminded them why. This period belonged to the late Pleistocene, an immense stretch of time marked by repeated climatic changes. Temperatures shifted, rainfall patterns changed, grasslands expanded and contracted, forests moved, rivers altered their courses over generations, animals followed water and vegetation, people followed animals, plants, water, and memory. You stand and look beyond the shelter. The landscape seems enormous because almost nothing divides it. There are no property lines, no paved paths, no bridges, no signs. Movement depends on knowledge. Perhaps your group has visited this shelter before. A shallow rock overhang blocks some of the wind. Water lies within walking distance. Trees nearby provide branches. Plants grow along the wetter ground. The place is temporary, but it is familiar. You notice old ash near one side of the shelter. Broken fragments of stone lie scattered nearby. A few weathered bones remain from earlier meals. These traces suggest that people have stopped here before, perhaps many times. Some researchers suggest that repeatedly used shelters and resource areas created a rich mental geography long before permanent villages existed. Others caution that the archaeological record is too incomplete to tell us exactly how often particular groups returned. And incomplete is certainly the right word. Most prehistoric life simply vanished. Wood decayed. Plant fibers disappeared. Animal hides rotted. Footprints washed away. Voices left nothing that archaeology could recover. That last thought changes the silence around you. Almost everyone who lived in this world disappeared without leaving a name. No diary tells you who slept beside this fire. No inscription records who made the stone tool in your hand. No portrait preserves the face of the child sitting near the shelter entrance. And yet absence does not mean emptiness. You can still imagine bodies gathering close when the temperature falls. You can hear stone tapping against stone. You can smell smoke trapped in hair and animal hides. You can feel dust beneath your feet and the cool roughness of rock against your palm. The fire settles lower. Someone quietly places another branch across the embers. Tiny sparks rise into the darkness and disappear among the stars. Tomorrow will bring food, tools, walking, weather, children, gathering, perhaps hunting, and dozens of small decisions that make up an ordinary life. But tonight, you remain beside the ancient fire, beginning to understand just how full the human world already was long before anyone thought to call it civilization. The first thing you notice when morning comes is not the light. It is the cold. It has settled into the stone beneath you during the night and crept through the layers of hide that serve as bedding. Your shoulders feel stiff. Your hands are tucked close to your chest, somewhere near your feet. Another sleeper shifts and exhales slowly into the grey air. Then you notice the smoke. The fire has not gone out completely. A shallow bed of embers still glows beneath a crust of ash, red in some places, almost black in others. Thin smoke rises from the centre and drifts toward the opening of the shelter. Keeping fire alive could save enormous effort. Making fire was possible for prehistoric people, but maintaining an existing flame was often much easier than starting again from nothing. Archaeological evidence shows that humans controlled fire long before 80,000 years ago. Though researchers still discuss how regularly different populations created fire themselves rather than preserving naturally obtained flames. You push yourself upright. The shelter around you slowly comes into focus. It is not a house. There are no walls in the modern sense, no wooden beams, no door, and certainly no convenient shelf where someone has left breakfast waiting. You're beneath a broad rock overhang that protects part of the group from wind and rain. Along the exposed side, branches, brush, and hides may have been arranged to create extra shelter. The ground has been chosen carefully. It is relatively dry. That alone makes it valuable. Several people remain asleep beside you, curled beneath the animal skins. Others are already awake. One adult crouches beside the fire, moving ash with a stick. Another sorts through several pieces of wood gathered the previous day. A child sits nearby with untidy hair, watching everything with the expression of someone who is awake physically, but has not yet agreed to participate in mourning. Some things, apparently, survive for at least 1,000 years. You rub your hands together. The air carries several smells at once. Smoke is strongest. Beneath it is the earthy scent of damp stone and soil. There is also animal hide, old ash, wood, and traces of yesterday's food. None of it would smell particularly fresh by modern standards. There is no soap beside the entrance. No hot shower waits nearby. No washing machine has thoughtfully removed smoke from everyone's clothing overnight. Yet prehistoric people were not necessarily indifferent to cleanliness. Water was valuable for drinking, washing, food preparation, and many other purposes. Though exactly how people managed personal hygiene this far in the past is difficult to reconstruct. You stand carefully. Your sleeping place is simple. Several hides have been laid over softer plant material, perhaps grasses or leaves depending on what grows nearby. Bedding made from vegetation has been identified at some prehistoric archaeological sites, showing that people sometimes deliberately prepared sleeping surfaces rather than simply collapsing onto bare stone. That is one of those small details that makes prehistoric life unexpectedly familiar. Nobody enjoys sleeping directly on rocks if another option exists. You step toward the fire. The adult beside it adds dry material to the embers. For several moments, almost nothing happens. Then a small flame appears. It catches along a thin branch. Another piece is added. The flame grows slowly, illuminating hands, faces, and the uneven surface of the shelter wall. The warmth is immediate but limited. You have to stand close to feel much of it. Outside, daylight spreads over the valley. Birds are beginning to call from the trees. Somewhere farther away, you hear the brief movement of animals through vegetation. The sound is enough to make several people look toward the shelter opening. Attention begins early here. You cannot wake up and spend 20 quiet minutes staring at a glowing screen. Your glowing screen is the landscape. And unfortunately, it does not come with notifications explaining whether the rustling nearby is breakfast or something that would prefer to eat breakfast itself. You step outside, cool air touches your face. The sun is still low, and the land carries a soft silver light. Grass and shrubs are wet with moisture. The ground near the shelter is marked by footprints from people moving in and out over many days. Some prints belong to children. Others are deeper and wider. Near the fire area lie fragments of stone. You crouch and pick one up. It is a discarded flake, probably produced during tool-making around 80,000 years ago. Many human groups use sophisticated Middle Stone Age technologies in Africa and Middle Paleolithic technologies across parts of Eurasia. These traditions included prepared core techniques designed to control the size and shape of stone flakes. That means a toolmaker often had an idea of the desired result before striking the stone. The process was not random. You look back toward the shelter. Someone is already working with a stone core. Tap, pause, turn, tap again. The sound is quiet but distinct. It joins the crackle of the fire and the morning calls of birds. A lesser-known detail is that prehistoric occupation areas could contain enormous numbers of stone fragments. Tool production leaves behind chips and flakes. meaning a place that looks almost empty to you might appear extraordinarily busy to an archaeologist thousands of generations later. Every fragment is part of a vanished action. Someone sat there. Someone held that stone. Someone decided it was useful or useless. You place the flake down. Nearby, two adults are examining containers or bundles made from perishable materials. Almost none of these objects are likely to survive long enough for future archaeologists to find them. Wooden digging sticks, baskets, cords, bags, sleeping mats, and hide coverings may have been common parts of daily life while leaving only rare traces. This creates a strange distortion. Stone survives extremely well. Wood does not. So prehistoric people can appear in museums as though they spent most of their time making stone tools. In reality, their world was probably filled with objects made from materials that disappeared. Researchers remain divided over exactly how complex many forms of organic technology had become by 80,000 years ago because preservation is so uneven. You begin to appreciate how much history can vanish simply because it was made from the wrong material. The child who'd been sitting by the fire now walks outside. Another follows. An older member of the group remains near the warmth, watching them. Morning is becoming active. People stretch, someone checks a tool, someone else carries a piece of wood toward the fire. Quiet conversation passes between several adults. You cannot know exactly what language sounds like here, but communication is clearly essential. Plans have to be shared, warnings have to be understood. Children have to be corrected, resources have to be remembered. Perhaps someone is discussing where to search for food. Perhaps another person noticed animal tracks yesterday. Perhaps the group needs water. You cannot recover the words, but you can see the purpose behind them. The sun rises higher. The shelter becomes warmer. Smoke moves lazily beneath the rock ceiling before drifting outward. You look back at the place where you slept. It is rough, temporary, crowded. And yet it contains nearly everything a home needs at this moment. Warmth, people, tools, food, memory, protection, a familiar sleeping place. You realize that home does not need walls to feel like home. Around you, the group begins preparing for another day, and the ancient morning, quiet only moments ago, fills gradually with movement. You begin to notice the people before you notice what they are doing. Until now, the shelter has felt like a collection of movements around fire, stone, hides, and morning light. But as the day brightens, individual faces become easier to follow. A child crouches near the edge of the shelter, scratching lines into the soil with a twig. Another sits beside an older woman who is sorting pieces of plant material into a small bundle. A man farther away checks the edge of a stone flake with his thumb. Two adults are speaking quietly near the entrance. Someone laughs, someone else answers. The group is small enough that almost every sound belongs to someone you recognize. That matters. Around 80,000 years ago, people did not live in anonymous crowds. Human communities were generally small and mobile, and daily survival depended heavily on cooperation among relatives and companions. You would know the habits of the people around you extremely well. You know who walks quickly. You know who notices animal tracks first. You know who becomes impatient when hungry. You know which child is likely to wander too close to the fire. You know who remembers distant water sources, and everyone knows things about you too. Privacy, by modern standards, is rather limited. There is no bedroom door to close, no private kitchen, no quiet office, no convenient excuse to say you're busy answering emails. Life happens in view of other people. You eat near them, you sleep near them, you work beside them. You travel together. You become annoyed with them and still depend on them before sunset. This close social world is one of the most important parts of prehistoric survival. Food is unpredictable. One person may return with little while another finds more than expected. Sharing reduces risk. Children require attention for years. Injuries happen. Knowledge must be passed between generations. A group that cooperates well has advantages that no single hunter, however skilled, can reproduce alone. You watch one adult hand a piece of food to a child who's been lingering nearby. The child takes it without ceremony. No grand lesson about community is announced. Nobody pauses to explain the evolutionary benefits of food sharing. It is simply what happens. That simplicity can make prehistoric cooperation easy to overlook. Archaeologists have found evidence at many prehistoric sites suggesting repeated occupation, shared activity areas, food processing, tool production, and communal use of fire. The archaeological record cannot tell you every relationship within a group, but it strongly suggests that early humans were deeply social. You sit near the shelter entrance. From here, you can watch almost everyone. The older woman continues sorting plant fibers or grasses. Her movements are slow but confident. She may not travel as far as younger adults today. That does not make her useless. Quite the opposite. Older individuals can preserve knowledge accumulated over decades, where water remains during dry months, which plants appear after certain rains, how to recognize changes in animal movement, which valley becomes dangerous after storms, which stone source lies beyond the ridge. Memory becomes more valuable when there are no books. An elder is, in a sense, part map, part archive, and part instruction manual. You might gently hope they are also patient. Because there is no search engine available if they become tired of answering questions. Researchers continue to question exactly how prehistoric groups were organized socially. Some models emphasize extended family networks, while others suggest that bands could include people connected through wider alliances and movement between communities. The details remain uncertain. What seems far less uncertain is that people did not spend their entire lives in isolation. Groups met other groups, people moved, relationships formed, knowledge travelled, materials travelled too. Stone from distant sources sometimes appears far from where it naturally occurs. This could mean people carried it themselves over long distances, exchanged it, or passed it through networks involving several communities. That is a quieter kind of prehistoric connection. No marketplace, no coins, no written contracts, just people, objects, journeys, and memory. You notice the children again. They are rarely far from adults. One is now watching someone work stone. The adult strikes the core carefully. The child watches the angle, tap, pause, turn, tap. A tiny flake falls. The child leans closer. This is education without a classroom. Skills can be learned by watching, copying, practicing, failing, and trying again. The process would apply to far more than stone. Children need to learn plants, tracks, animal behavior, weather, fire, water, social rules, danger, routes, perhaps songs, perhaps stories, perhaps gestures specific to their community. Almost none of that will leave a direct archaeological trace. One lesser-known detail is that children may actually be visible indirectly in prehistoric archaeology through poorly made practice tools, small footprints, or miniature handprints at later sites. Researchers must interpret such evidence cautiously, but it reminds you that prehistoric camps were not populated only by serious adults holding spears. Children were everywhere too, and where there are children, there is probably noise, questions, mistakes, games, arguments over objects that suddenly become incredibly important for reasons no adult understands. You hear a burst of laughter nearby. Two children are moving around a fallen branch. Perhaps they are playing. Perhaps they are imitating adults. The distinction may not matter much. Play itself can teach balance, coordination, cooperation, risk, and social rules. human childhood is unusually long compared with that of many animals. That extended period of dependence gives young people time to absorb an enormous amount of cultural knowledge. It also means adults must support them for years. This creates another reason cooperation matters. No single person can gather food, make tools, maintain fire, watch children, care for an injured companion, scout the landscape, and rest all at once. Tasks overlap. People help one another. The group functions because responsibilities can shift. You see this happening around you now. One adult leaves the shelter carrying a digging stick. Another remains with the children. Someone tends the fire. Someone checks tools. An older person sits in sunlight near the entrance. There is no written schedule, no manager, no morning meeting with 12 agenda items and a document nobody has read. And yet coordination exists. It has to. You begin to understand that prehistoric life is not simply a contest between humans and nature. It is also a continuous exercise in relationships. Trust matters, reputation matters, generosity probably matters, conflict almost certainly exists too. Small groups are not automatically peaceful. People can disagree over food, partners, movement, responsibilities, or decisions. But conflict must be managed somehow when you still need the same people to help you cross a difficult landscape tomorrow. You look around at the faces near the shelter. These people are not background figures. They are your protection against hunger, injury, loneliness, and uncertainty. They carry pieces of knowledge you do not possess, and you carry something they may need. As the morning continues, the group slowly spreads into different tasks. But nobody feels truly separate, even when individuals walk beyond the shelter. Invisible threads remain between them: memory, obligation, affection, need. And perhaps that is one of the most familiar things about this distant world. Long before cities and governments, human life was already built around other humans. By the time the sun has climbed above the ridge, the air has warmed slightly, but not enough to make clothing unnecessary. You look down at yourself. There is no woven shirt, no stitched linen, no wool coat, no leather boot shaped neatly around your foot. Instead, what you wear is built from the materials available in the world around you: animal hide, fur, plant fibers, perhaps strips of sinew, perhaps simple cords. The exact form depends on climate, location, season, and whatever knowledge your community has learned to preserve. Around 80,000 years ago, humans were already living across environments where protection from cold, wind, rough ground, and intense sunlight could matter greatly. Clothing in some form was therefore almost certainly part of life in many regions, even though very little of it survives archaeologically. That is the frustrating thing about prehistoric clothing. Stone lasts, skin does not. A carefully prepared hide can keep a person warm for years, and then disappear almost completely after burial. So you have to reconstruct the wardrobe of this world from scattered clues. You run your fingers across the hide wrapped around your shoulders. It feels stiff in some places and softer in others. The inner surface still carries traces of the animal from which it came, though it has been scraped, stretched, dried, and worked enough to make it useful. Preparing a hide is not simply a matter of removing it from an animal and wearing it immediately. Fresh skin is heavy, wet, and quick to decay. Someone has to clean it. Fat and tissue must be scraped away. The hide may need to be stretched. It may be dried, smoked, rubbed, or treated in other ways depending on local techniques. That means clothing begins long before dressing. It begins with labor. You watch one adult kneeling beside a skin spread across the ground. A stone tool moves steadily over the surface. Scrape, pull, scrape again. The motion is repetitive and patient. Tiny fragments fall away. This is one of those prehistoric tasks that would rarely appear in a dramatic painting, but it may consume far more time than a hunt. You shift the hide more tightly around your shoulders. It blocks the breeze. That simple relief reminds you why clothing matters for humans, especially those moving into cooler environments. Covering the body can extend the range of places where people can live comfortably and safely. There is an interesting clue hidden in something far less glamorous than a fur cloak: human body lice. Genetic studies of lice have been used to estimate when regular clothing became common. Because clothing lice depend on garments rather than living directly on the scalp. Different studies have produced different dates and uncertainties, but the evidence supports the idea that humans had developed habitual clothing well before the appearance of agriculture. It is perhaps not the most poetic archive of fashion history, still. A parasite can occasionally preserve a story that fabric cannot. You smile at the thought, then adjust the material around your waist. The garment is practical. Nothing about it needs to satisfy modern ideas of elegance. And yet practicality does not mean people have no sense of appearance. Nearby, someone has reddish pigment on part of their skin. Ochre has been used by human groups for a very long time, including in periods earlier than 80,000 years ago. Red ochre could serve several purposes. It might be used on bodies. It might be applied to hides. It could play a role in decoration, treatment of materials, or activities carrying social or symbolic meaning. This is where certainty begins to fade. Archaeologists can identify pigment. They can analyze mineral composition. They can sometimes show that pieces were intentionally ground or scraped, but they cannot simply ask the person who used it why. You watch an adult rub a small amount of red material between fingers. The color is deep and earthy. It catches beneath the fingernails. A little falls onto the ground. Perhaps it is functional, perhaps decorative, perhaps both. Modern life often separates useful things from beautiful things. Prehistoric people may not have made that distinction so neatly. A hide can keep you warm and still be chosen for its color. A cord can secure a bundle and still carry personal meaning. Pigment can protect material in one context and mark identity in another. You move toward the edge of the shelter where several scraps of skin are lying in sunlight. Some have holes near their edges. The presence of holes does not automatically prove sophisticated tailoring. True-eyed needles are much later than 80,000 years ago, but people did not need metal needles or modern sewing equipment to fasten skins together. Awls, pointed tools, sinew, tendons, plant fibers, thongs, and simple piercing techniques could all help secure coverings. How elaborate those garments were remains difficult to establish. Some researchers picture relatively simple wraps and capes in many settings. Others argue that colder environments may have encouraged more fitted clothing earlier than once assumed. The evidence is incomplete enough that neither image should be treated as universal. You look at your feet. They raise another question. Did people here wear footwear? Perhaps direct evidence from this period is scarce. Soft hide shoes rarely survive. Changes in foot bones have been used by some researchers to suggest habitual footwear in later prehistoric populations. But the timing and spread are not settled with precision, so your feet might be wrapped in hide, or they might remain bare in warmer terrain. Again, location matters. Prehistoric life is not one costume worn everywhere for thousands of years. The people living in a warm African landscape do not face the same clothing demands as people occupying colder parts of Eurasia. That seems obvious once you say it aloud, yet prehistoric humans are often imagined as though everyone owned the same shaggy fur outfit, apparently issued by some extremely ancient clothing department. Reality would have been far more varied. You glance at the others. One person wears a hide over the shoulders. Another has material tied around the waist. A child has less covering because the day is warming. An older person remains wrapped more heavily near the fire. Garments shift with activity. The same hide may serve as bedding at night and clothing in the morning. A skin can become shelter, a blanket, a carrying surface, a protective covering. Objects are valuable because making them costs time. Nothing here is casually disposable. You feel the weight of the hide again. It smells faintly of smoke. That is not accidental either. Smoke can help dry materials and discourage some insects. A garment kept near fire absorbs the scent of camp after days or weeks. Everyone probably carries it. Smoke in hair, smoke in hides, smoke in bedding. The smell of home follows you. The sun rises higher, soon. Some members of the group will leave the shelter to search for food. Before that happens, belts are tightened, coverings adjusted, and useful objects secured. There is no wardrobe mirror, no polished glass. You judge clothing by warmth, comfort, movement, and whether it stays attached when you walk. You pull the hide closer once more. It is rough, simple, carefully made, and in a world where weather can shape the entire day, it is one of the most important technologies you own. You leave the shelter carrying something that would look almost insignificant in a modern hand. A piece of stone, not a random pebble, not a crude lump picked up 5 minutes ago. This one has been shaped deliberately. Its edges are thin. Its angles are controlled. Someone has struck it again and again with enough precision to create a useful cutting surface. You hold it carefully because the edge can slice skin as easily as hide. That small fact immediately changes the way you think about prehistoric technology. The tool does not look complicated, but the knowledge behind it is. By around 80,000 years ago, human groups in different regions were using sophisticated stoneworking traditions that required planning before the final cutting edge appeared. In parts of Africa, Middle Stone Age technologies included prepared cores and carefully shaped points. Across much of Eurasia, Middle Paleolithic toolmakers also used methods that allowed them to predict the form of flakes before striking them free. You crouch near a flat patch of ground where one of the more experienced toolmakers is already working. A stone core rests in one hand. Another stone serves as a hammer. The first strike seems ordinary. Tap. A small chip falls away. Then the core turns slightly. Another strike. Another fragment drops. You begin to see that the toolmaker is not simply smashing stone until something sharp appears. The shape is being prepared. Certain surfaces are flattened, others are preserved. Angles are adjusted. Each blow changes what becomes possible with the next one. It is a sequence, and sequences must be remembered. You watch the hands closely. The toolmaker pauses more often than you expect. There is no hurry. Stone cannot be persuaded to reverse a mistake. A poorly placed strike may ruin the piece. So the person studies the core before continuing. You can almost see the next flake being imagined before it exists. That ability matters. A tool begins as an idea. The object in your hand may therefore represent several stages of thought. Choose suitable stone, carry it, prepare the core, control the striking platform, remove the desired flake, retouch the edge if necessary. Then decide what the tool is actually for. Cutting meat, scraping hide, working wood, shaping another tool, processing plants, preparing a spear. One stone edge can participate in many different tasks. That flexibility is useful when everything you own must either be carried or left behind. You pick up a discarded fragment near your foot. It is sharp too. Not every useful flake needs to look beautiful. This creates a slightly amusing problem for modern museum displays. Visitors often expect prehistoric tools to resemble neat little artifacts worthy of glass cases. But many perfectly functional flakes look like something you might sweep off a workshop floor. The person who made them did not know future archaeologists would want attractive examples. They simply wanted an edge that worked. You turn the fragment toward the light. Fine ripples run across the surface where force travelled through the stone. The marks preserve the instant of impact. It is almost like frozen motion. Certain stones are especially good for this kind of work because they fracture predictably. Flint is famous, but people also use chert, quartzite, obsidian in suitable regions, silcrete, and other knappable materials. What matters is how the stone breaks. A good raw material can produce thin, sharp edges, and good stone is not always found beside the camp at some prehistoric sites. Stone materials originated many kilometers away. That does not necessarily mean one person walked directly from the quarry to the shelter carrying a backpack full of cores. The material might have moved through repeated journeys, seasonal routes, or contact between groups. Still, its presence tells you that prehistoric landscapes were mentally organized in ways that went far beyond the immediate horizon. People knew where resources were, they remembered, they returned. You follow the toolmaker's gaze toward a larger stone nearby. It is rejected almost immediately. Perhaps the grain is wrong. Perhaps a crack runs through it. Perhaps experience recognizes trouble before your inexperienced eyes can see anything. Skill often looks simple when someone has practiced it for years. You try striking a piece yourself. The result is disappointing. A tiny chunk breaks off at the wrong angle. Nothing about it resembles the elegant flake in your other hand. The toolmaker looks at your effort. You imagine the expression requires no translation. Apparently, being born in prehistory does not automatically make you good at stoneworking. Practice still exists. So does embarrassment. You try again. This time, you hold the core differently. The strike lands nearer the edge. A larger flake comes away. It is not perfect, but it has a sharp side. That feels strangely satisfying. Archaeologists sometimes reconstruct ancient techniques through experimental archaeology, learning to make tools using stone, wood, bone, and other traditional materials. These experiments reveal how much physical control and learned judgment can hide inside artifacts that initially appear simple. A single mistake in angle or force produces a completely different fracture. The difference between success and failure may be only a few degrees. You begin to appreciate the patience required to teach these skills. A younger person approaches and watches from nearby. No formal lesson begins. There is no lecture. The child simply observes. Perhaps later they will be given a poorer piece of stone and allowed to experiment. That is one possible route by which technology survives generation after generation, not through books, through hands, eyes, corrections, imitation, memory. The evidence cannot tell researchers exactly how teaching worked in every community this far back. Some skills may have been learned largely through observation, others probably required direct demonstration. The complexity of certain technologies suggests that people were capable of transmitting detailed procedures reliably, though how much verbal instruction accompanied that process remains beyond archaeology's reach. You run your thumb near the edge of your new flake without touching the sharpest part. Tool-making also produces waste, a lot of it. Small chips around the working area, some will be ignored, others may be useful later. A person living here probably understands stone economically. A large core contains future edges. A broken tool may still be reshaped. A flake can become a scraper. A smaller flake can cut fibers. Pieces are used until their usefulness declines. This does not mean every fragment is treasured forever. People discard plenty, but they understand the work embodied in good material. Later, you walk a short distance from camp carrying your tool. You use it to trim bark from a wooden shaft. The edge bites cleanly. Thin curls fall onto the ground. Stone is shaping wood, and wood, unlike stone, is unlikely to survive for tens of thousands of years. That imbalance matters. Future archaeologists may discover the cutting tool but lose the spear shaft it helped create. They may find flakes, but not the basket the flakes helped prepare materials for. Prehistoric technology therefore appears more stone-dominated than daily life probably was. Your world contains wood, hide, fibre, bone, pigment, resin, cordage, and other materials. Stone is simply the survivor. As sunlight warms your hands, you look again at the tool. It's small enough to disappear inside your palm, yet it carries planning, geology, memory, craftsmanship, teaching, and movement across landscapes. You realize that prehistoric technology does not need gears or metal to be sophisticated. Sometimes sophistication is knowing exactly where to strike by late morning. The shelter is no longer the center of your attention. Food is, not because anyone has announced a crisis. There is no panic, no dramatic shortage. Just the ordinary pressure that shapes almost every day in this world. People have to eat, and food does not arrive by itself. You leave camp with several others carrying simple tools and containers made from materials unlikely to survive thousands of years. Perhaps there is a digging stick, perhaps a woven bag, perhaps hide folded into a carrying sling. The route is familiar. You follow a shallow trail between grass and low shrubs, moving toward ground where moisture gathers after rain. The landscape has already taught your group what grows where. You know which plants appear in open sunlight, which roots prefer softer soil, which trees produce edible fruit at certain times of year, which patches are worth visiting. This kind of knowledge may be far more important to daily survival than the dramatic hunt that modern imagination tends to emphasize. Hunting leaves spectacular bones. Gathering leaves fewer monuments. A wooden digging stick decays. Fruit disappears. Leaves become soil. Seeds may survive under the right conditions, but much plant use is simply harder to detect archaeologically. That creates a distorted picture. If future researchers discover animal bones beside stone tools, meat becomes obvious. The handful of berries eaten on the walk home does not. You stop beside a patch of vegetation. One of your companions crouches and pushes a digging stick into the earth. The movement looks simple. It is not random. They know what lies underneath. The soil breaks apart. A thick root emerges. It is covered in dirt and hardly resembles food. Still, it may contain useful carbohydrates, moisture, and energy. You help gather several more. The work is slow. Dig, pull, shake away soil, move to the next plant. No animal charges across the horizon. No one raises a spear. This is prehistoric food gathering at its least cinematic and probably among its most important. For hunter-gatherer communities, diets could be remarkably flexible. Depending on environment and season, people might consume roots, tubers, fruits, nuts, seeds, leaves, shellfish, insects, eggs, fish, small animals, and meat from larger prey. There was no single prehistoric menu. A person living near a coast faced different opportunities from someone occupying grassland. A forest community knew different resources from people crossing drier country. You place the root into the carrying bundle. Its weight is reassuring. One plant does not look impressive. 10 begin to look like a meal. You walk farther. A companion stops suddenly beside a shrub and examines the leaves. Some parts are ignored, others are selected. This is where plant knowledge becomes serious. The landscape contains food. It also contains things that taste unpleasant, cause illness, or offer almost no nutritional value. Trial and error may have contributed to knowledge over generations, but your group does not wake each morning and conduct a cheerful experiment with unknown berries. Most useful information is inherited socially. Someone taught you, someone taught them. The chain may extend backward through countless generations. That knowledge is invisible archaeology. You cannot excavate a warning spoken 80,000 years ago, yet such warnings could save lives. A little farther on, several small fruits are collected. You taste one. It is sharper than modern cultivated fruit. There is more seed, less flesh. No one has spent thousands of years selecting this plant for sweetness and size. Agriculture does not exist. Domestication has not reshaped the landscape. Everything you eat is wild today. A supermarket can offer large sweet fruit throughout the year, sometimes shipped across continents. Here, the season decides what is available. If fruit ripens for a few weeks, you eat it then. If nuts appear later, your attention shifts. If animals move, you notice. If rainfall fails, the whole pattern changes. This dependence on season does not necessarily mean constant starvation. People who understand their environment deeply can exploit many resources, but there is less separation between ecology and dinner. Weather is food, rain is food, migration is food, knowledge is food. You stop beneath a tree. Several people search the ground below it. Something small and hard is collected. Nuts. Perhaps. They require effort. Shells must be opened. Some plant foods may need roasting, pounding, soaking, or other processing before they become useful. Processing is another part of prehistoric diet that tends to disappear from casual imagination. Food is not always eaten the moment it is found. The archaeological record from some prehistoric sites preserves grinding stones, battered surfaces, plant residues, and microscopic traces that suggest people processed vegetable foods in more complex ways than older stereotypes once assumed. Exactly how common particular techniques were around 80,000 years ago varies by region and site. The evidence is uneven, but the broader picture is clear enough. Prehistoric people were not simply waiting for meat. You continue walking. Near wetter ground, someone lifts a flat stone. Several insects scatter underneath. A few are collected. You hesitate. Your modern instincts are not enthusiastic. Your prehistoric companions appear less concerned. Insects can provide protein and fat, and many human societies throughout history have eaten them routinely. The strange part may not be that people eat insects here. The strange part may be how many modern societies decided that eating one particular animal is perfectly normal while another is somehow an emergency. You decide not to overthink breakfast. Later, tracks appear near the muddy edge of a small water source. They're fresh, animal prints. Several people pause to examine them. The marks are not ignored simply because today's task is gathering. Every trip is also information gathering. Someone notices direction. Someone studies size. A broken stem nearby may reveal how recently the animal passed. This could matter tomorrow, or this afternoon, or not at all. Prehistoric subsistence is flexible because opportunities change constantly. You cannot organize the day around a rigid schedule. A fruiting tree may alter the route. Fresh tracks may alter the plan. A sudden storm may send everyone home. A dead animal discovered unexpectedly may become an important source of food. You react to what the landscape offers. Researchers have spent decades debating how much early human diet depended on hunting compared with scavenging, gathering, fishing, and other strategies in different periods and environments. The answer is unlikely to be identical everywhere. That is important. Prehistory lasts too long and covers too much geography for one simple survival formula. You begin the return journey with the carrying bundle noticeably heavier. Roots knock gently against one another as you walk. Your fingers smell of soil and crushed leaves. The sun is warmer now. Insects hum above the grass. Nobody is celebrating. You have not performed a heroic act. You have simply found food, and that is precisely why this matters. Most prehistoric survival was probably built from ordinary successes like this. A root found in the right soil. A patch of ripe fruit remembered at the right season. A handful of nuts, a few insects, a route to water. Small discoveries repeated again and again as the shelter comes back into view, smoke rising faintly above the rocks. You realize that survival does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like carrying dirt-covered roots home before lunch. You leave the shelter again, but this time you're not looking for roots, fruit, or firewood. You're looking for signs, at first. The ground seems ordinary. Dust, grass, scattered stones. A shallow patch of mud where water lingered during the night. Then the person walking ahead of you stops. They crouch. You follow. There, pressed into the damp earth, is a track, not a vague mark, not a random depression, a footprint. The edges are still sharp. Water has not yet softened them. The animal that made it passed recently. You lean closer. The person beside you points toward another print several steps away. Then another. A line begins to appear. Suddenly the landscape no longer looks empty. It looks written on. The problem is that there are no letters. You have to know how to read everything else. For people living 80,000 years ago, tracking could be one of the most practical forms of knowledge available. Animal movement could help locate food, water, seasonal routes, and danger. The ability to interpret signs in the landscape would have been part observation, part memory, and part experience accumulated over years. You follow the print slowly. The animal was not running. The spacing tells you that much. A few blades of grass are bent in the same direction. One branch is broken low to the ground. There is a darker patch where something brushed against wet soil. Each clue is small. Together, they become a story. Someone in your group notices droppings. They're still moist. That means the animal may be closer than you thought. No one becomes excited. Excitement is not especially useful when trying to move quietly. Instead, everyone becomes more attentive. You lower your voice, so does everyone else. There is something strangely peaceful about this kind of concentration. No one is rushing, no one is arguing. The entire group is listening with their eyes. A bird calls from a nearby tree. You glance upward. The others do too. Animals can reveal the presence of other animals. Bird alarm calls may signal movement below. Sudden silence can matter. A herd changing direction can matter. The smell carried by wind can matter. You begin to understand that tracking is not simply staring at footprints. It is reading relationships, ground, weather, vegetation, animal behavior, sound, time, even light. A shallow print can disappear quickly if the sun dries the mud. Tracks in loose sand blur under wind. Rain erases detail, so the landscape is always writing and deleting at the same time. You move farther from the shelter. The prints lead towards slightly higher ground. Here the soil is harder. The obvious trail vanishes for a moment. You think the tracking is over. The person ahead of you does not. They walk several steps sideways, pause, look, then point toward a stone. There is a faint scuff mark beside it. Farther on, a stem has been bent. You would have walked past both. Skill changes what is visible. Modern researchers who study traditional tracking communities have often noted how expert trackers notice tiny differences in surface, movement, and animal behavior that inexperienced observers miss entirely. That helps you appreciate an uncomfortable truth. If you were truly dropped into this world with only modern habits, you would probably be much less useful than you imagine. Your phone battery would be irrelevant. Your ability to recognize a coffee logo would not help. And the people around you would be explaining what animal walked past 10 minutes ago, while you are still trying to decide whether the mark was even a footprint. You continue. The wind shifts. One person raises a hand. Everyone stops. A faint smell moves through the air. Animal, dry vegetation, dust. You cannot separate them clearly, but someone else can. The group changes direction slightly. You notice how little discussion is needed, a gesture, a glance, a shared understanding. That efficiency comes from familiarity. Tracking knowledge may be taught, but it is also lived. Children walking with adults would see signs over and over again. They would ask questions, make mistakes, guess wrongly, be corrected. Gradually, the landscape would become less mysterious. One of the younger members points at a mark in the soil. An adult looks at it, then shakes their head. Not the same animal. The child tries again farther ahead. Learning happens while moving. There is no separate school day. The world itself provides the lesson. You cross a patch of softer earth and find another set of prints. Smaller, more delicate, different animal. Now 2 stories cross each other. One trail is old, one is fresh. You begin to see how easy it would be to misread the ground if you only looked at shape. Depth matters, moisture matters, whether debris has fallen into the print matters, whether an insect has crossed it matters. Even a single track contains time. There is no archaeological artifact for most of this intelligence. A tracker does not leave behind a fossilized thought saying, "This print is from yesterday." That knowledge disappears with the person. This is one reason the abilities of prehistoric humans can be underestimated. Stone tools survive. Mental skill does not. You walk toward a cluster of shrubs. The group slows again. Several leaves have been eaten recently. A branch has been stripped. The marks are fresh. Perhaps the animal fed here. One person looks toward the horizon. Another checks the wind. You begin to suspect that the group already knows what species made the trail. Maybe you should too. But no one explains it for your benefit. You are supposed to learn. That feels fair. A little farther on, you find hair caught on rough bark, just a few strands. You touch them lightly. The clue seems almost ridiculously small. Yet it confirms the animal passed close to this spot. Traces like hair, dung, tracks, and feeding marks can reveal presence even when the animal itself remains unseen. Prehistoric hunters and foragers likely depended on combinations of such clues. Not one miraculous sign. There is no reason to imagine every tracker as infallible. People could lose trails, misjudge freshness, confuse animals, follow the wrong direction. Skill reduces mistakes. It does not eliminate them. That uncertainty is part of the day. Some anthropologists have argued that complex tracking encourages forms of reasoning surprisingly close to hypothesis testing. You observe a sign. You propose what caused it. You compare that idea with the next clue. If the evidence does not fit, you revise. Others warn against making the comparison too neatly. Since traditional ecological knowledge cannot simply be translated into modern scientific categories, still, as you follow the trail, the logic feels familiar. Something passed here. How long ago? Which way? How fast was it alone? Where might it go next? Question after question, answered by the ground. Near midday, the trail leads toward a distant stand of trees. The group stops. No one continues immediately. Perhaps the animal is close. Perhaps this is enough information for now. You look back the way you came, from here. The route is almost invisible. Yet the others could probably retrace it. You realize that movement through this landscape depends on storing an extraordinary amount of detail. Landmarks, sun position, wind, water, tracks, season, plant growth, animal behavior. Everything connects. You look down at the last clear footprint. Soon, wind may blur it. By tomorrow, it may be gone, but for the moment, it is enough. A silent message pressed into earth, and you are slowly learning how to read it. You know the hunter started before anyone says so. The group changes. Voices become softer. Movements become slower. Tools are checked one last time. A wooden spear passes from one hand to another, its shaft polished by use. its point hardened and carefully shaped. Another hunter carries a stone-tipped weapon, secured with bindings and adhesive made from natural materials. Nothing about the equipment looks luxurious. Everything about it looks deliberate. You follow several people away from the shelter, keeping enough distance that your footsteps do not disturb the ground ahead. The animal tracks from earlier have given the group a direction. Now the task is different. Tracking tells you where something has been. Hunting asks you to predict where it will go. That requires patience. Prehistoric hunting is often imagined as a chaotic rush toward enormous animals, but successful hunting usually depends on getting close, choosing favorable terrain, understanding wind, and coordinating with others. You learn that immediately. The hunters do not charge. They wait. You stop beside low vegetation. The wind is moving toward you. Good. Your scent is less likely to travel toward the animals. One person gestures for everyone to remain low. Another moves slowly toward a rise where the land can be viewed without exposing the whole group. You crouch. The ground is warm now. Dry grass presses against your hands. A small insect crawls across your wrist. You resist the urge to brush it away dramatically. This is not the moment to introduce yourself to the entire landscape. Minutes pass, then more. Hunting includes an impressive amount of doing absolutely nothing. You begin to understand why patience is a technology too. An experienced hunter must know when movement helps and when movement destroys an opportunity. You hear a faint sound ahead, vegetation shifting, a low snort. The group becomes completely still. Your breathing suddenly seems much louder than it did a moment ago. One of the hunters looks toward a gap between shrubs. You follow their gaze. There, an animal. Then another. A small group feeding at the edge of the more open ground. They are not monsters from a fantasy of the Ice Age. They are living creatures behaving normally, heads down, chewing, walking a few steps, lifting their heads to listen. Their calmness makes the hunt feel more complicated. You're watching animals that have senses of their own. They can smell, hear, run, notice movement. You cannot simply decide that they will become food. The landscape gets a vote. The animals get a vote too. Humans had been hunting large and medium-sized game long before this period. And archaeological sites from the Middle Pleistocene and later contain evidence of deliberate animal exploitation. Wooden spears from much earlier periods also show that thrusting and throwing weapons had deep roots in human survival strategies. But the exact balance between hunting and scavenging was never identical across all times and places. Some sites preserve clear evidence of active hunting. Others leave room for several interpretations. The scene in front of you therefore represents one possibility among many, not a universal daily ritual. One hunter begins to move, slowly, so slowly that at first you're not certain they are moving at all. A foot slides forward, pause, another step. The body stays low. A second hunter shifts in another direction. You realize they are creating positions rather than simply approaching together. Coordination can turn several ordinary people into something more effective. That is one reason humans are dangerous hunters despite lacking claws, horns, or impressive teeth. Cooperation changes the equation. You wait. The animals continue feeding. A child would not be brought into every dangerous hunt. But younger members could still learn hunting knowledge through less risky outings. Observation, stories, imitation, and gradual participation. Skills must eventually be transferred. How close can you approach? Which direction will an animal flee? What does nervous movement look like? When should you abandon the attempt? Those questions cannot be answered by muscle alone. One of the animals raises its head. Everyone freezes. Its ears turn. Your heartbeat becomes unhelpfully enthusiastic. The animal looks toward the shrubs. Nothing moves. After several seconds, it lowers its head again. You release your breath slowly. The hunter nearest you adjusts their grip. Stone points from this broad period sometimes show impact damage or patterns suggesting use on hunting weapons. Hafting a point onto a shaft increases what a tool can do, but it also requires several technologies to work together: stone, wood, binding, adhesive, planning. The glue itself can be surprisingly sophisticated. At prehistoric sites, researchers have identified evidence for adhesives produced from materials such as plant gums, resins, and ochre mixtures. Creating reliable compounds may involve selecting ingredients, controlling proportions, and sometimes heating them carefully. It is a useful reminder that prehistoric chemistry existed long before anyone called it chemistry. The hunters move again. This time, the animals react. One bolts, the others follow. For a few seconds, everything that was quiet becomes movement. Feet strike hard ground, vegetation shakes, a spear is thrown, another hunter runs forward. You stay where you were told to stay. There is no theatrical shouting, no triumphant music, just sudden physical effort. Then distance opens between humans and animals. One animal has been struck but is still moving. The group does not celebrate. Instead, they follow. A wounded animal can remain dangerous. It can travel far. It can disappear. The hunt is not finished simply because a weapon connected. You move after them at a steadier pace. Tracks are easier to follow now. Fresh marks cut through dust. Broken stems point the way. One hunter finds a small trace of blood on vegetation. You keep the description gentle. There is no need for anything graphic. What matters is the labor. The group has already spent hours finding, watching, approaching, and following the animals. Even success carries a cost in time and energy. Eventually, the hunters stop beneath scattered trees. The animal lies farther ahead. Still now, there is relief, but not the wild celebration modern films might expect. Work is about to begin. A successful hunt creates an immediate logistical problem. Meat is heavy, hide is heavy, bones are heavy, useful organs, fat, tendons, and other materials all have value. You can't simply place the animal into the back of a vehicle and drive home. The carcass must be processed, divided, and carried. Stone tools appear. The same sharp flakes that look small beside the morning fire now become essential. One person begins organizing the work. Another looks toward the route back to camp. Someone may return to bring additional help. There is a curious detail in prehistoric archaeology that often surprises people. Butchery marks on bones can preserve tiny traces of tool movement for tens of thousands of years. A few cuts across a bone may reveal where stone edges removed flesh or separated joints, from marks only millimeters wide. Archaeologists can reconstruct parts of an activity that once involved an entire group. You look at the hunters around you. None of them know that their ordinary meal might someday become evidence. To them, this is simply food. Food for children. Food for older companions. Food for the people who maintained the fire while you were away. Perhaps enough to share beyond the hunters themselves. The sun has begun to lean westward when the first portions are prepared for carrying. Your arms already ache. The walk home will be slower, yet the mood is calm. The hunt succeeded today. Another day it may not. That uncertainty never disappears. As you turn toward the distant shelter, you understand that hunting is not really about bravery. It is about knowledge, patience, cooperation, risk, and a great deal of quiet waiting. By the time you return to the shelter, the weight in your arms has changed the way you walk. The journey back is slower. Everyone carrying part of the animal has adjusted their grip more than once. Shoulders ache. Hands feel stiff. Dust clings to skin and hide clothing. The sun is lower now, warming the tops of the grasses with a softer light. From a distance, the camp looks almost peaceful. Smoke rises in a thin column. Children move near the shelter. Someone near the fire notices the returning group and stands. There is no need to explain much. The sight of what you're carrying tells the story. Food has arrived, but meat is only one part of that story. You set down your load near a prepared working area, and immediately the group begins turning a successful hunt into something useful. Sharp flakes appear, hide is opened carefully, fat is separated, meat is divided into manageable portions. Bones are examined rather than treated as useless waste. This is where the idea of a prehistoric meal becomes more complicated. For hunter-gatherers, a carcass can provide far more than muscle. Fat is valuable because it contains dense energy. Marrow inside bones can be even more prized. Tendons may provide material for bindings. Hide can become clothing, bedding, shelter covering, containers, or straps. Bone itself may later serve as raw material for tools. Nothing about the animal has to fit neatly into the modern categories of food and rubbish. You sit beside someone working on a long bone. The outer surface has already been cleaned. A stone hammer is used to break it. The sound is dull. Crack. Pause. Another strike. Eventually the bone opens. Inside is marrow. It looks unremarkable, but nutritionally it matters. Fat is especially important when diets depend heavily on lean wild meat. Protein alone is not enough. The body also needs energy from fat and carbohydrates. This helps explain why prehistoric people were likely interested in much more than simply collecting the largest amount of meat possible. You taste a small portion of marrow. It is rich, dense, nothing like the roots you gathered earlier. Both foods matter for different reasons. The roots supply plant energy. The marrow supplies fat. Wild fruit contributes sugars and micronutrients. Nuts provide another combination. A flexible diet is safer than dependence on a single resource. That flexibility becomes even more important when seasons change. You look toward the bundle of roots collected that morning. Some are being placed near the fire. Others may be eaten later. The day's meals are beginning to combine. Plants gathered quietly in the morning. Animal food brought back in the afternoon. Small items collected along the way. Perhaps insects. Perhaps seeds. Perhaps eggs if anyone found them. The prehistoric table is not really a table at all. It is an accumulation. One clue to this broader diet comes from places where microscopic plant remains have survived on stone tools or in ancient dental calculus. Such evidence has revealed starch grains and other traces showing that prehistoric people consumed and processed plant foods far more often than older popular images once suggested. The stereotype of early humans living almost entirely on enormous slabs of meat is tidy. Reality is less tidy, and probably much more interesting. You watch someone place pieces of food near the fire. Cooking changes texture. It can make some foods easier to chew and digest. Heat may reduce certain pathogens. It can soften roots. It changes flavor. Control of fire had already existed for a very long time by this point in human history. Though the frequency and exact role of cooking varied across populations and environments, you lean closer to the flames. The smell of roasting meat grows stronger. Children drift nearer. So do adults who are previously busy with other tasks. Food rearranges the social space. People gather. Someone hands a small cooked piece to an older member of the group. Another portion goes to a child. The hunters do not simply sit apart guarding everything they brought back. Sharing is visible. How food was distributed in prehistoric communities is difficult to reconstruct in precise detail, but cooperative sharing is widespread among many recent hunter-gatherer societies and fits the broader social demands of mobile foraging life. A hunter who succeeds today may fail tomorrow. A gatherer who finds a rich plant patch may return with more than one person can eat. Sharing smooths out uncertainty. It also creates relationships. You accept a piece of cooked meat. It is tougher than most modern meat. Wild animals move constantly. Their muscles are lean. There is no controlled breeding for tenderness, no refrigeration, no freezer, no convenient package with a date printed on the side. If food is abundant. The group has to decide what can be eaten now and what might be preserved. Drying is one possibility in suitable conditions. Smoking is another. Exactly how extensively such preservation methods were used 80,000 years ago is difficult to pin down because the evidence is often indirect. You can imagine the practical pressure, though a large animal may provide more food than a small group can consume immediately. Letting it spoil would be costly. Even so, preservation depends on weather, fuel, time, insects, and local knowledge. Nothing's automatic. You notice someone scraping tissue from a hide. That task will continue long after everyone has eaten. The animal keeps providing value. One of the children sits nearby with a small bone fragment. An adult takes it away, apparently deciding it is not a toy. The child looks deeply offended. That response feels timeless. Another person cracks a smaller bone. A little fat remains inside. It is removed carefully. Archaeological sites sometimes preserve patterns of deliberate bone breakage that suggest people were extracting marrow rather than discarding bones intact. At some places, bones were broken while still fresh. The fracture patterns differ from those of bones broken much later when dry. From that small distinction, researchers can infer behavior that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. You find that strangely intimate. A broken bone becomes evidence of hunger or efficiency, or preference, perhaps all three. The fire crackles, someone turns the roots, their outer surfaces darken, the smell becomes sweeter. You eat one after it cools enough to handle. The texture is softer than before, earthy, slightly sweet, not spectacular, comforting. This meal is not a feast in the ceremonial sense. It is simply a successful day becoming evening. That ordinariness matters. Most meals in human history were probably not celebrations, they were maintenance. Eat enough, share enough, save what you can, use what remains, then do it again tomorrow, the more you watch. The less useful the old division between hunter and gatherer seems as a complete explanation of life. People shift tasks. A person who hunted today may dig roots tomorrow. Someone collecting plants may notice animal tracks. An older companion may remain near camp but still contribute knowledge. Tool-making, childcare, or food processing. Daily life overlaps, so does food. You look around at the group eating near the fire. Some chew meat, others eat roasted roots. A child is given something small and soft. Someone scrapes the last edible material from a bone. There is no single prehistoric diet sitting before you. There is adaptation. That is the larger pattern. People eat what the environment offers, what their skills allow them to obtain, and what their community knows how to process. As darkness begins to gather beyond the shelter, the smell of smoke and cooked food settles into the air. You rest your hands beside the warmth. For tonight, stomachs are fuller, the remaining food is organized, the useful hide is saved, bones are set aside, and tomorrow, the search begins again. The evening settles slowly. At first, the change is only in the light. The grass beyond the shelter loses its gold color. The distant ridge becomes darker, shadows gather beneath shrubs and stones. The air cools, and the warmth of the day begins to leave the ground. Then the fire becomes the center of everything. You move closer without thinking, so does everyone else. A few people arrange themselves along the edge of the glowing circle. Children settle near adults. Someone adds a branch. Another person shifts a stone away from the hottest part of the hearth. The flames rise, faces appear more clearly. Beyond them, the landscape fades. This is one of fire's quiet powers. During daylight, your world stretches toward the horizon. At night, it contracts to a few meters of light inside that small circle. People are warm enough to sit, talk, work, eat, and watch one another outside it. Darkness belongs to everything else. Humans had been using controlled fire long before 80,000 years ago. By this period, fire was already woven deeply into daily life for many populations, though exactly how consistently it was used in every region is harder to reconstruct. You do not need archaeology to explain why it matters tonight. Your hands are warm, that is enough. You stretch your fingers toward the flames. Heat reaches your palms first, then your face. Your back remains cold, so you turn slightly. It is an ancient little dance, warm one side, then the other. Move closer, move away, repeat. The fire crackles as moisture escapes from a branch. Tiny sparks drift upward. One lands briefly on the ground and disappears. Someone pokes the embers with a stick. The red glow deepens. You smell smoke, cooked food, damp hide, and crushed grass. There is something else too, a sense of safety, not perfect safety. Fire does not create an invisible wall. But many large predators are cautious around flames and groups of humans. Light also makes it easier to notice movement nearby. You can see each other. You can see the entrance to the shelter. You can see eyes reflecting at the edge of the darkness if anything comes too close. That matters. Still, the fire demands attention in return. Fuel must be gathered, embers must be watched, children must be kept from leaning too near. A flame that warms can also burn bedding, hides, dry grass, and skin. Fire is useful because people learn to manage it. You watch someone place a thicker piece of wood onto the hearth. It does not ignite immediately. Smoke curls around it. Then one edge catches. The group does not need an enormous blaze. A smaller, steady fire may be better. It consumes less fuel. It produces enough heat for cooking and warmth. It is easier to control. Fuel availability can shape how fire is used. In wooded country, branches may be plentiful. In drier landscapes, people may rely on shrubs, roots, or whatever combustible material can be gathered. Even a basic fire therefore reflects local ecology. You pick up a roasted root left near the warm stones. The outside is darkened. Inside, the flesh has softened. Cooking has changed it. Heat can make some plant foods easier to chew and digest, and it can alter starches in ways that increase the energy available to the body. The same is true for meat. Cooked food is not automatically better in every possible sense, but it can reduce chewing time, improve digestibility, and change what foods are practical to eat, long before pots, ovens, or kitchens. Fire had already transformed dinner. You take a bite. The center is still hot. You wait. A child beside you does the same and immediately regrets not waiting. Some lessons apparently require direct experience. The child blows on the food with great seriousness. Around you, the group becomes quieter. The day's work is mostly done. Stone tools can still be repaired beside the flames. Fibers can be sorted. A hide can be scraped. Food can be divided. But the pace changes. Darkness discourages travel. The fire creates time that daylight alone cannot provide. This may have altered human social life in profound ways. Once darkness no longer meant immediate inactivity. People could remain awake together after practical tasks ended. What happened during those hours is mostly lost. The ashes can tell future archaeologists that a fire burned here. They cannot tell them what anyone said. Perhaps people discussed tomorrow's route. Perhaps they described animals seen during the hunt. Perhaps an older person repeated a story everyone already knew. Perhaps children listened. Perhaps someone made a joke that would make absolutely no sense to you even if you understood the language. There is no way to know. The silence of the evidence leaves room for several possibilities. Still, nighttime conversation is easy to imagine because communication is already essential during the day. Fire simply changes the setting. You look across the flames at the faces opposite you. Light moves over them constantly. Every expression appears and disappears. A smile, a tired glance, a moment of concentration, hands turning a tool, smoke drifting between people. This shifting light may have been one of the first regular forms of nighttime illumination in human life. There is no lamp, no candle, no torch mounted on a wall, just burning wood. And yet it creates a room without walls. The fire is the room. You hear movement in the darkness. Several heads turn. Nothing appears. The sound stops. Conversation resumes. That small moment reminds you that everyone remains alert. There are predators in this world, hyenas, large cats, other dangerous animals depending on the region. Fire helps, but people still listen. One person sits where the shelter opening is easy to watch. Perhaps this is habit, perhaps caution, perhaps simply the best place to sit. Again, archaeology cannot tell you. A strange detail hides beneath the ashes at some ancient hearths. Repeated fires can alter the colour and chemistry of sediment. Bones may become scorched. Stone can crack from heat. Microscopic ash layers can preserve evidence of burning long after every piece of wood has vanished. A prehistoric campfire may disappear in a single night and still leave a signature tens of thousands of years later. You glance down at the hearth. To you, it looks temporary. To the future, it may become a record. Another branch collapses inward. The flames briefly brighten. Someone moves closer. The child who burned their mouth earlier is now sleepy, leaning against an adult. The group has entered a different part of the day. No hunting, no gathering, no long walking, just warmth. This matters too. Rest is part of survival. Bodies recover, tools are prepared, relationships continue, knowledge moves between people. You begin to understand that fire does not merely protect humans from the cold, it reorganizes time. Without it, darkness might push everyone quickly towards sleep. With it, the day stretches, not dramatically, perhaps only by an hour or two, but over generations. Those evening hours may have become important spaces for teaching, planning, storytelling, and social connection. How far back such traditions extend cannot be measured cleanly. Speech leaves no charcoal layer. Stories do not fossilize. Laughter has no archaeological footprint. Yet as you sit among the group, it feels almost impossible to imagine that everyone simply stared at the flames in complete silence. You rub your hands together. The fire is lower now. Nobody rushes to build it higher. Fuel has value. The night will be long. Embers can be preserved beneath ash. By morning, a careful hand may coax them back into flame. That small act links one day to the next. You watch red light pulse beneath the dark surface of the hearth. The landscape outside has vanished completely. Only stars remain above the shelter, for the moment. Everything you need seems gathered inside this little circle. Warmth, food, light, people, and time enough to sit together before sleep. The fire settled into a steady glow when you notice the children again. They're quieter now, not asleep yet, but slower. One sits close to an adult shaping a piece of wood. Another turns a small stone over and over in both hands. A younger child leans against someone's side, fighting sleep with a stubborn determination common to children everywhere. You watch them and realize how much of prehistoric life must have been learned this way. Not in classrooms, not from written instructions, by watching, by copying, by being corrected, by trying again. Human childhood is unusually long. and that long period of dependence gives young people time to absorb difficult skills. In a world where survival depends on knowing plants, animals, weather, fire, stone, water, roots, and social rules, childhood is not simply waiting to become useful. It is training for almost everything. A child near the hearth reaches toward a flake of stone. The adult beside them gently moves it away and offers a duller piece instead. The child looks disappointed. The adult continues working. No lecture follows. The message is clear enough. Not that one. This one. The child imitates the grip. Wrong at first, then better. You smile. It is easy to imagine prehistoric teaching as stern and serious because the world itself can be dangerous. But learning does not have to feel severe. Children play, they imitate, they test limits, they repeat adult behavior in smaller, safer forms. A stick may become a spear, a handful of pebbles may become pretend tools, a patch of soft ground may become a place to copy footprints. You can almost see knowledge entering the body through repetition. One child stands and throws a short stick toward a mark in the dirt. It lands nowhere near the target. Another child laughs. The first throws again. Still bad, again, slightly closer. Nobody seems concerned that this practice lacks formal structure. Throwing improves by throwing, balance improves by climbing, tracking improves by following tracks. Plant knowledge grows by accompanying people who already know plants. You learn because life keeps happening around you. That may be one reason knowledge can become so deeply tied to place. A child does not simply memorize the name of a plant. They learn where it grows, what season it appears, which part can be eaten, how it smells when crushed, what happens if the leaves turn yellow, whether animals eat it too. The lesson is attached to the landscape itself. The same is true of water. A spring is not just a location. It is a place reached after a certain ridge, near certain trees, perhaps only reliable during part of the year. Memory becomes geographic. You glance at the older members of the group. They are living libraries. But the children are the copies being made, not perfect copies. No culture is. Each generation learns, adjusts, forgets some things, adds others. That slow transmission may be one of the most powerful technologies humans possess. Stone tools break, wood rots, fire goes out. Knowledge can be rebuilt if enough people remember how. There are hints of this process in the archaeological record. Certain tool-making methods persist across enormous spans of time and wide regions, suggesting that techniques were reliably passed from person to person. A complicated reduction sequence cannot survive for generations if everyone simply guesses from scratch. Some form of teaching or close observation must be involved. Exactly how much was explained through speech is another matter. The physical structures involved in spoken language do not preserve neatly, and language itself leaves no fossil. Researchers draw on anatomy, genetics, cognition, and comparison with later behavior. But there is still no single moment in prehistory when everyone agrees language suddenly became fully modern. You do not need to solve that tonight. You only need to listen. Voices move around the fire, short phrases, gestures, a warning when a child moves too close to the heat, a response from across the shelter, laughter after someone says something you cannot understand. Communication is everywhere. Whether the language matches the complexity of your own speech cannot be measured from this scene, but these people coordinate travel, hunting, childcare, tool-making, and social relationships. Silence alone would make that difficult. A younger child begins tracing marks in the dirt with one finger. Perhaps the shapes mean nothing. Perhaps they copy something seen earlier. Perhaps it is simply play. You find yourself wanting the marks to be important. Modern people are very good at doing that with prehistory. A line becomes a symbol. A scratched stone becomes a message. A cluster of objects becomes a ritual. Sometimes those interpretations are correct. Sometimes enthusiasm runs ahead of evidence. The safest answer is often less satisfying. You can see the marks, you cannot see the intention. That uncertainty is not a failure. It is part of studying lives that left no written explanations. The child wipes the marks away with one hand. There goes your archaeological career. Another adult is working with plant fibers nearby. A teenager, or someone close to that age, watches. The older person twists the fibers together slowly. The younger one copies the movement. Their first cord separates. They try again. This skill may never survive in the ground. The cord may hold a bundle tomorrow and decay within months or years after being discarded. Yet learning to make it could be essential. Cordage can bind tools, tie hides, secure loads, create nets or traps in later and perhaps earlier contexts. It is one of those quiet technologies that may have shaped daily life far more than its preservation suggests. You begin to notice how much work occurs in hands rather than words. A wrist angle, finger pressure, the rhythm of twisting, how tightly to pull, when to stop. These details are difficult to describe even in modern language. Sometimes watching is simply better. You think about your own habits. If a device stops working, you might search for a video showing exactly what to do. Here, the expert is already sitting beside you. The tutorial is alive, and if you fail, they can immediately take the object back and show you again. No advertisement first, no subscription required. The child with the dull stone is now tapping it against another piece. The sound is irregular. Tap, tap. Long pause. Tap. An adult glances over. The child changes position. Tap. A small flake breaks free. The child's face changes instantly. Pride. Surprise. Possibly both. The adult looks at the flake, then returns it. No applause. Still, the child keeps it. Perhaps that is enough. At prehistoric sites, archaeologists sometimes identify unusually small or poorly executed stone artifacts and wonder whether some were produced by learners. It is a tempting idea. Not every crooked flake has to belong to a child. Adults make mistakes too. But experimental work and careful analysis have opened the possibility that traces of apprenticeship can sometimes be recognized in ancient stoneworking debris. That means a failed attempt may survive longer than the person who made it. There is something gentle about that, a mistake becoming evidence of learning. The fire dims further. One child has finally fallen asleep. Another still watches the adults. Soon everyone will settle down. Tomorrow the lessons continue without anyone needing to announce them. A walk becomes instruction. A meal becomes instruction. A hunt becomes instruction. A warning becomes instruction. Even play carries practice inside it. You look at the sleeping child beside the fire. They do not know they are preserving a culture. They are simply growing up. And that may be exactly how human knowledge survived so much time. Morning returns gently. The fire is low again, reduced to a quiet bed of warmth beneath grey ash. Outside, pale light spreads across the valley, and the first birds are beginning their scattered calls. Most people rise quickly. One person does not. You noticed them yesterday. An older adult who moved carefully around the shelter, favouring one leg and spending more time near the fire than the others. Today you understand why. Their left foot is swollen around the ankle. Perhaps they stepped badly on loose stone. Perhaps the injury happened several days ago. You cannot know exactly. What matters is that walking has become difficult, and yet the group has not left them behind. Someone brings water. Another person shifts a hide beneath their leg. Food saved from the previous evening is passed over without ceremony. The injured person accepts it, eats slowly, and watches the morning activity around them. This is not an extraordinary scene here. It is simply care. Evidence from deep prehistory occasionally gives you glimpses of people who survived injuries, illnesses, or physical impairments that would have made life more difficult. Some ancient skeletons show fractures that healed. Others reveal severe dental loss, joint disease, or long-term physical conditions. A healed injury is more than damage preserved in bone. It means time passed after the injury occurred. The person continued living, sometimes for years. You look again at the swollen ankle beside the fire. A minor injury can become serious in a world without antibiotics, hospitals, or modern surgery. A cut may become infected. A broken bone can limit movement. A damaged tooth can make eating painful. There are no pharmacies, no ambulances coming. Still, prehistoric people are not completely helpless. They can clean wounds, apply pressure, keep someone warm, provide food, carry water, allow rest. Perhaps use plants whose properties are known through generations of experience. Exactly which remedies were understood 80,000 years ago is difficult to establish. Plants rarely preserve in ways that reveal their medicinal purpose, even if traces are found. Intention is difficult to prove. A bitter leaf beside a body could have been medicine, or food, or bedding. The archaeological record has a habit of giving you objects while keeping the explanation. You sit near the injured person. They are repairing something. Their hands work perfectly well. A strip of hide lies across their lap. They scrape it slowly with a stone edge, removing dried material. That immediately corrects another modern assumption. An injured person is not necessarily an inactive person. Someone who cannot travel far may still process food, repair tools, prepare hides, watch children, maintain fire, sort materials, or teach. Contribution does not require every body to perform the same task. Nearby, a child approaches carrying 2 pieces of stone. The older person examines them. One is returned. The other is kept for a moment. A finger traces its edge. Then the child is shown where to strike. The lesson from yesterday continues. Knowledge does not become less useful because the person carrying it walks slowly. Perhaps the opposite is true. Years lived in this landscape accumulate information. An older person may know dry season water sources that younger adults have visited only once. They may remember a dangerous crossing. They may recognize an unusual animal call. They may understand a stoneworking technique others perform poorly. Keeping such a person alive can benefit everyone. But you should be careful not to turn every act of prehistoric care into a cold calculation. Humans form attachments. Parents care for children long before those children can contribute food. Partners help one another. Friends matter. Grief exists. Affection exists. The bones cannot preserve a gentle hand placed on someone's shoulder. That does not mean the gesture never happened. One of the most famous examples of long-term survival with serious physical limitations comes from Neanderthal remains. Individuals have been found with healed injuries and conditions that would have affected movement or ordinary activity. Such cases have often been interpreted as evidence of social support. The interpretation sounds straightforward until you look closely. How much assistance did a particular person truly require? Could they still gather food? Could they perform specialized tasks? Did their condition worsen only late in life? Different cases produce different answers, so the larger picture is persuasive. While individual stories remain incomplete, you watch someone bring the injured adult a portion of roasted root. There is no debate around the fire about whether they have earned breakfast. The food simply changes hands. Sharing has another advantage here. It protects people from bad days. Yesterday's successful hunter could be tomorrow's injured ankle. The person who provides food this week may depend on someone else next month. Cooperation spreads risk across the group. Modern insurance comes with paperwork. Prehistoric insurance comes with relatives, companions, and the hope that everyone remembers who carried water when you could not walk. You hear the injured person laugh at something a child has done. The sound is quiet. The child apparently objects to being laughed at and replies with great seriousness. The adults nearby smile for a moment. The injury becomes almost irrelevant. That may be worth remembering. A person is never only their damaged bone. They are still part of conversation, still part of memory, still someone who can be irritating, funny, patient, stubborn, generous, or tired. Archaeology often reduces individuals to conditions: healed fracture, missing teeth, arthritis, trauma. But those labels describe bodies, not entire lives. An especially revealing detail comes from prehistoric people who survived substantial tooth loss. Losing several teeth can make eating tough foods difficult. Yet some individuals lived long enough for the empty tooth sockets to heal completely. Perhaps foods were softened for them. Perhaps cooking made meals manageable. Perhaps they simply adapted. There is rarely enough evidence to know exactly how. Still, survival itself tells you something. You glance toward the fire where a root is becoming soft in the heat. Food can be cut smaller, cooked longer, crushed, shared. Small adjustments can keep someone participating in the group. This kind of care may not require formal medicine. It requires attention. The sun rises higher. Several adults prepare to leave. The injured person will remain at the shelter today. So will an older companion and some children. No one announces this as a sacrifice. Daily roles simply rearrange themselves. Someone who walked yesterday stays. Someone who remained yesterday leaves. The community bends rather than breaking. You help place another piece of wood beside the hearth. The injured adult reaches for it and pushes it toward the embers. A small flame catches. There is something quietly fitting about the gesture. They cannot travel far this morning, but they can keep the fire alive. Around that fire, children will eat, tools will be repaired, food may be prepared. People returning later will find warmth waiting. You begin to see survival differently. It is not only the strongest person bringing down an animal, it is also the person remembering water, the child learning a skill, the adult sharing food, the injured companion tending embers. Thousands of small acts hold the group together. And when you look around this ancient shelter, you realize that humanity's long story may depend just as much on helping one another stand again as it does on learning how to hunt. The morning has become warmer by the time you notice the color. It is red, not bright red, not the artificial red of paint squeezed from a tube. This is darker, earthier, closer to rust and dried clay. A small piece of ochre rests in someone's hand near the edge of the shelter. They turn it against a stone surface. A faint powder begins to gather. You move closer. The pigment catches in the grooves of the grinding stone and clings to the person's fingers. It seems like such a small thing, a coloured mineral, a patch of dust. And yet objects like this have become some of the most intriguing traces left by people living deep in prehistory. Ochre was collected and used by human groups tens of thousands of years before agriculture, cities, or writing at sites in Africa. Pieces of red ochre have been found with signs of scraping, grinding, and deliberate processing. You watch the powder accumulate. The person adds a little more. Perhaps it will be mixed with fat, perhaps with water, perhaps with another material. Perhaps it will be rubbed directly onto skin or hide. You do not know. That uncertainty is important. A lump of pigment can survive. A reason cannot. The person touches the mixture and draws a red line across part of a hide. Functional, decorative, symbolic. Maybe all three. Modern categories may not fit neatly here. You're used to separating things. Paint is decoration. Medicine is practical. Clothing is useful. Jewelry is personal. Ritual is symbolic. But people do not always organize their lives into such clean boxes. A colour can protect a material and still look beautiful. A necklace can show identity and still function as a social signal. A patterned object can be both useful and meaningful. You notice several small objects lying nearby. One is a pierced shell. Another is a smooth piece of bone. A third is simply a stone with an unusual colour and shape. You pick up the shell. It is light. The hole is small but clearly visible. If it was worn, perhaps it hung from cordage or sinew. Personal ornaments appear in the archaeological record by at least the Middle Stone Age in parts of Africa. Though their distribution is not continuous or uniform, some discoveries include perforated marine shells found far from the shore. That matters because a shell carried inland has already travelled. Someone noticed it. Someone selected it. Someone kept it. Possibly someone wore it. A small object can therefore carry several layers of information: movement, preference, identity, memory. You turn the shell in your palm. If this object belongs to someone here, it may mean something you cannot see. Perhaps it marks a relationship. Perhaps it was exchanged. Perhaps it identifies a group. Perhaps it simply looks pleasing. The temptation to assign a grand explanation is strong. Prehistory invites that kind of imagination. A red mark becomes religion. A shell becomes status. A pattern becomes a code. Sometimes those interpretations may be close. Sometimes they may tell you more about modern expectations than prehistoric intention. You place the shell back. Someone nearby is working another piece of ochre. This one has lines scratched into its surface. The grooves cross each other. A pattern appears. You lean closer. Intentional engraving on ochre has been found at prehistoric sites such as Blombus Cave in South Africa, where examples date to roughly the time range surrounding your journey and somewhat earlier. Those discoveries became famous because they suggest that people were deliberately creating geometric designs. But what did the patterns mean? There the trail goes quiet. You can measure the lines. You can identify the mineral. You can date the archaeological layer. You cannot sit beside the maker and ask whether the marks represent identity, counting, memory, decoration, or nothing more complicated than a pleasing pattern. The silence feels almost teasing. You're close to thought, close enough to see its trace, not close enough to hear it. The person beside you continues grinding pigment. A child watches. Red dust gets onto the child's fingers. The child touches their cheek. Now there is a small streak of colour across the skin. An adult notices and laughs softly. The child seems pleased with the result. Perhaps prehistoric symbolism occasionally begins in ways as ordinary as that. Not every meaningful behaviour needs a solemn ceremony. Humans like colour. Humans like pattern. Humans notice unusual objects. Humans decorate themselves in countless societies. It would be strange if those impulses appeared only after cities. You walk outside carrying a small piece of ochre in sunlight. The colour looks brighter. You rub it against a flat stone. Powder gathers beneath your hand. The action is satisfying, simple, immediate. You can imagine mixing this powder with other substances. Ochre can sometimes contribute to adhesive mixtures used in hafting stone tools. So the same red material that seems decorative may also help secure a point to a shaft. That is a wonderfully prehistoric complication. The colour on a body and the colour in a tool-making mixture might come from the same mineral. Meaning and function overlap again. You continue walking toward a shaded area near the shelter. There, several objects have been placed together, not discarded, placed. You cannot tell why. Perhaps they are raw materials waiting to be used. Perhaps possessions. Perhaps things collected because someone values them. One small stone is unusually smooth, another has a natural hole through it. You pick up the smooth one. It fits comfortably in your palm. There is no obvious use. That alone makes it interesting. People sometimes transport objects that seem to have little practical value. A pretty stone, a shell, a fossil, a crystal, something with an unusual shape. Such behavior raises the possibility that curiosity and aesthetic preference have very deep roots. You look at the stone again. Would you carry it for several kilometers simply because you liked it? Probably. Humans still do exactly that. We fill shelves with objects collected from beaches and mountains, then explain to ourselves that they are important. Perhaps the habit is older than the shelf. Back near the fire, someone threads a small shell onto cord. The cord itself will almost certainly vanish. The shell may survive. Future archaeologists might find it separated from the body that wore it, the clothing it touched, and the story attached to it. What remains can make prehistoric life seem sparse. What disappeared may have made it visually rich. Cordage, wood, feathers, painted skin, decorated hides, hair arrangements, plant materials. None preserve reliably. You begin to imagine a camp with far more colour and texture than the grey stone artefacts displayed in museums. The world here may be earthy, but it is not necessarily dull. Red pigment on skin, dark hides, pale bone, shells catching light, green fibres, wood polished by handling, firelight shifting over everything. The person with ochre draws another mark. No one explains it. You stop trying to force an answer. Perhaps understanding prehistory sometimes means accepting that certain questions must remain open. You can know that people selected colour. You can know that they carried unusual objects. You can know that some created patterns. You can know that ornamentation existed. The meaning belongs to them. Still, the presence of these things changes the way you see the group. These are not people concerned only with calories and shelter. They notice, choose, arrange, decorate, remember, possibly symbolize. You look again at the red dust on your fingers. It is a tiny trace, yet it reaches towards something enormous, the human urge to make the world mean more than survival. The red dust is still faintly visible on your fingers when someone near the shelter looks toward the distant ridge. The movement is small, just a turn of the head. Then another person notices. You follow their gaze. At first, you see nothing, only grass, rock, scattered trees, and sunlight lying across the slope. Then something moves. Not an animal, a person. Another figure appears behind the first, then another. They're too far away for faces, but they are clearly human. The mood around you changes, not into panic, into attention. Your group is not alone. That should not surprise you. People living 80,000 years ago did not exist as isolated families scattered permanently across empty continents. Groups moved, separated, met others, exchanged knowledge, formed relationships, and sometimes competed for the same resources. The wider human world was already complicated. You stand near the shelter entrance as the distant figures approach. No one runs to meet them. No one hides. People simply watch. Perhaps these visitors are familiar. Perhaps not. Someone beside you adjusts the position of a spear. Another person remains beside the children. Several adults step forward. You begin to understand that encounters between groups can carry several possibilities at once: information, trade, partners, news, tension, opportunity, risk. The visitors come closer. Their clothing looks slightly different. One carries stone unlike the material used around your own shelter. Another has a piece of hide tied in a way you have not seen before. Small differences become visible before any great difference does. That feels important. Human culture rarely announces itself with a sign. It hides in habits, how something is tied, how a tool is shaped, which pigment is preferred, how people greet one another. The first exchange is quiet, hands move, voices follow. The sounds are not entirely unfamiliar. Perhaps these groups share a language. Perhaps related dialects, perhaps communication depends partly on gesture. You cannot know, but the tension begins to soften. Someone laughs. A child emerges from behind an adult. That seems to help. Soon objects are being examined. A stone core passes between hands. A shell is shown. Someone points toward the direction the visitors came from. You realize that information may travel almost as easily as objects. A group arriving from another valley can bring news of water, animal movement, danger, weather, other people. The landscape becomes larger through conversation. Then another thought settles over the scene. Depending on where you are in this prehistoric world, not every human beyond the horizon necessarily belongs to the same population. By around 80,000 years ago, Homo sapiens lived in Africa and had begun appearing beyond it in parts of Southwest Asia at various times. Neanderthals occupied large areas of Europe and Western Eurasia. Other human populations also existed. Although the identities and ranges of some remain difficult to reconstruct, the ancient world held more than one kind of human. That fact would have felt far less strange then than it feels now. Today, Homo sapiens is the only surviving human species. You grow up assuming there is only one human form around you. Here, the family tree still has several living branches. You imagine traveling far enough north and west. The people you encounter there may be Neanderthals. They would not look like monsters. They would look human, recognizably human, but different. Stockier bodies, heavy musculature, distinctive facial anatomy, adaptations suited to environments that could be cold and demanding. They made sophisticated stone tools. They used fire. They hunted large animals. They cared for injured individuals. They occupied shelters and moved through familiar territories. The old image of a dim, clumsy cave dweller belongs more to outdated stereotypes than to modern archaeology. There is another remarkable detail hidden not in stone, but inside your own cells. Many living people outside sub-Saharan Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. That means encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did not always end with one group simply avoiding the other. At some points, people had children together. Genetics preserves meetings that archaeology alone could never fully reconstruct. You look toward the visitors again. They are Homo sapiens in this imagined scene. But now every unfamiliar face carries a larger possibility. Contact changes populations. People move between groups. Relationships link communities. Children grow up carrying ancestry from more than one line. This is not civilization. There are no borders, no passports, no census office patiently asking everyone to select a category. Human identity is carried through bodies, kinship, language, custom, and memory. And those things can overlap. The timing of interactions between different human populations is still being refined as new fossils and genetic evidence appear. Some migrations of Homo sapiens beyond Africa seem to have occurred earlier than the major expansion that later contributed much of the ancestry of present-day non-African populations. Which group survived, which disappeared, and how often they encountered one another remain complicated questions. Prehistory is less like a straight road and more like many paths crossing and fading. You sit while one visitor examines a stone point from your camp. They compare it with one of their own. The shapes differ slightly. Perhaps the difference reflects tradition, perhaps raw material, perhaps intended use. A tool can reveal group habits, but archaeologists have to be cautious about treating every technological style as proof of a separate people. Two communities can make similar tools. One community can change technique. Ideas can travel without large numbers of people moving. Stone keeps the result but often hides the social process. The visitor returns your point. Another person offers them something in exchange. not necessarily trade in the formal modern sense. There are no fixed prices, no market stall, but objects can still move through gifts, reciprocity, obligation, and relationships. A piece of high-quality stone may travel, so may shells, pigments, stories, knowledge of roots, perhaps even methods for making tools. You notice that one young adult among the visitors spends a long time speaking with someone from your group. Maybe they know one another. Maybe this meeting was expected. Mobile communities cannot remain genetically and socially isolated forever without consequences. Connections between bands may therefore be essential for marriage partnerships, alliances, and wider social networks. How these arrangements worked this deep in time is largely invisible, but people must somehow have maintained relationships beyond the immediate camp. The visitors remain for part of the afternoon, food is shared, tools are examined, children watch each other cautiously, then less cautiously. One begins playing with another. The transformation takes only a few minutes. Apparently, prehistoric diplomacy may sometimes involve sticks and children getting bored. Eventually, the visiting group prepares to leave. Several people from your camp walk with them for a short distance. Perhaps they will return tomorrow. Perhaps someone from your group will travel with them farther. Perhaps the groups will not meet again for months. You watch the figures shrink against the landscape until they become difficult to distinguish from trees and stones. The valley feels larger now. Yesterday, your world seems centered on one shelter. Today you know that invisible networks stretch beyond it. Other camps, other families, other traditions, and far beyond the places you know, other kinds of humans. The prehistoric world is not empty. It is connected, quietly, unevenly, and across enormous distances. People are already finding one another. The visitors are gone by the time the light begins to soften again. Their footprints remain for a while near the shelter, so do a few objects they handled, a patch of disturbed dust, and the memory of voices that sounded almost familiar. By tomorrow, most of those traces will fade. Your own group is already thinking about movement. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon. The signs are everywhere once you start looking. The water source nearby is lower than it was days ago. Certain plants have already been gathered heavily. Animal tracks are shifting toward another part of the valley. The nights are becoming cooler. The landscape is quietly suggesting that this place will not remain equally useful forever. You watch two adults sorting belongings. There is not much. That is the point. A mobile life rewards possessions that can be carried, stone tools, prepared cores, useful hides, cordage, containers, wooden implements, pigment, food that can survive the journey. Perhaps a few objects valued for reasons that have nothing to do with survival. Everything else must either be used, abandoned, or replaced later. You pick up one of the hides. It is heavier than you expect. Suddenly the idea of owning 10 extra versions seems much less attractive. There is no prehistoric storage unit waiting down the valley. If you cannot carry something, its value becomes complicated. Mobility has shaped human life for most of our existence. Long before permanent villages and cultivated fields, people generally moved through landscapes according to water, food availability, animal movements, weather, and social needs. That movement didn't necessarily mean wandering without purpose. Quite the opposite. You may return to places already known, a spring visited during dry months, a grove where nuts ripen at a certain season, a rock shelter useful when winds change, a river crossing that becomes dangerous after heavy rain. The route can be flexible and still be remembered. You step outside. Someone is looking toward the distant ridge again, but this time not for visitors. They are studying clouds. Another person walks toward the water and returns with news conveyed in a few quick gestures. The group talks. You cannot follow every word, yet the decision-taking shape feels clear. The current camp is becoming less attractive. A move is coming. The idea changes the shelter immediately. Yesterday it felt like home. Now you notice how temporary everything is. Ash, sleeping places, discarded flakes, bones, bundles, a few hides arranged against wind. The entire household can be dismantled. It is strange if you're used to houses built to outlive their occupants. Here, home is less a structure than a pattern. People, fire, tools, knowledge, familiar routines. Carry enough of those with you and home can appear again somewhere else. The next morning, preparations begin in earnest. Children are given small loads. Adults carry the heavier ones. The injured person's ankle has improved enough for slow movement, though others will take more of their burden. A wooden shaft is tied to a bundle. Several hides are rolled. Food is divided among carriers. Nothing happens quickly. Packing is simply another form of judgment. What will be useful? What can be replaced? What weighs too much? A large stone that seemed valuable beside the shelter suddenly becomes less appealing when someone has to carry it for 15 kilometers. One person leaves it behind. You look at the abandoned core. Future archaeologists may someday wonder why. Perhaps they will invent an elaborate technological explanation. The truth might simply be that it was heavy. That is one of the charming dangers of interpreting prehistory. Every discarded object invites a theory. Sometimes the ancient answer may have been very ordinary. You lift your own bundle. The weight pulls against your shoulder. The group begins moving. There is no road, but there is a route. People follow landmarks rather than paving stones. A particular hill, a line of trees, the shape of the valley, the direction of the sun. Perhaps a distant mountain visible only on clear days. You realize that navigation here is built from memory layered onto terrain. The landscape is full of invisible instructions. Turn after the ridge, stay above the wet ground, crossed where the stones become pale. Water lies beyond the next rise. You could walk through the same country and see almost none of that. To the group, it is obvious. The journey continues at a steady pace. Nobody appears eager to break a prehistoric speed record. Energy matters. Children tire. Loads shift. Someone stops to adjust a strap. Another person checks the older companion's pace. Movement is planned around bodies as much as distance. By midday, you rest beneath scattered trees. The group eats a little. Water is shared. No one empties a container carelessly. You may know another source lies ahead, but certainty has degrees. Rain could have failed. Animals could have disturbed it. A familiar pool might be smaller than expected. Travel always contains small risks. The environment has changed dramatically many times during the late Pleistocene. Periods of greater rainfall could turn dry areas greener. Colder phases altered vegetation and animal ranges. Coastlines shifted as global ice volume changed. People didn't need to understand planetary climate systems to notice the consequences. A water source disappears. Animals leave. Certain plants become scarce. A route that worked for grandparents becomes less useful to grandchildren. Human mobility is partly an answer to such instability. You continue in the afternoon. The ground rises from the top of a low ridge. You can see farther than before. The old shelter is gone from view. Ahead lies another valley. Someone points toward a darker line of vegetation. Water. Possibly. The group changes direction slightly. This movement is not migration in the grand sense of people crossing continents. It is simply daily geography. But repeated movements accumulate. A family shifts a little farther. A group follows changing resources. Children grow up and travel with different companions. Generations pass. Over long periods, populations can spread across enormous territories without anyone experiencing the process as a single great expedition. That is how much of human expansion may have felt. Not a map with arrows, a sequence of ordinary decisions: stay, move, return, explore, follow. You reach the greener ground near evening. Water is there, shallow, but enough. The relief is visible. Bundles come down. Children wander toward the edge under watchful eyes. Adults inspect the area. There is shelter nearby, beneath trees and a low rock face. Someone gathers dry branches. Another checks the ground for signs of animals. Within an hour, the place begins to change. A small fire appears. Hides are unrolled. Tools are placed within reach. Food is organized. The unfamiliar becomes familiar through routine. You sit beside the new fire and look back toward the direction you came from. The previous camp already feels strangely distant, yet almost nothing essential was left behind. The group carried what mattered most: not buildings, not furniture, not property boundaries, knowledge, skills, relationships, memory. You begin to understand that movement is not the opposite of home. For these people, movement is part of how home survives. Night settles differently in the new camp. The old shelter had walls of stone close behind you, a familiar overhang, and several days of accumulated ash underfoot. Here, everything feels slightly more open. The fire is younger. The sleeping places are newly arranged. The surrounding darkness has not yet become familiar. You lie beneath a hide and listen. At first, you hear only the ordinary sounds of the people around you. Someone shifts position. A child murmurs in sleep. A piece of wood collapses softly into the embers. Then the larger landscape begins to emerge. Insects pulse in the grass. Wind passes through leaves somewhere beyond the firelight. Farther away, an animal gives a short call. Another answers from a different direction. You cannot see either of them. That changes the feeling entirely. Daylight allows distance. Night turns distance into sound. You become aware of how little light exists here. There is the fire, there are stars, there is perhaps a pale moon. Nothing else. No porch lamp, no glowing city on the horizon, no highway turning the clouds orange, no distant aircraft, if the moon is absent. Darkness beyond the flames can become almost complete. You lift your head slightly. The Milky Way stretches overhead with a brightness that would be difficult to see from many modern cities. Stars fill not only the obvious constellations, but the spaces between them. The sky feels crowded. For prehistoric people, this would not be an occasional experience during a camping trip. This is the normal night sky. You know its seasonal changes because you have seen them repeatedly. Certain stars appear in certain positions. The moon grows and shrinks. Its rising point shifts. The length of darkness changes with the seasons. How much of this was organized into named constellations, stories, calendars, or navigation systems? 80,000 years ago cannot be recovered with confidence. The sky leaves no transcript of the conversations people had beneath it. Still, repeated attention to celestial patterns would require no sophisticated instrument. Only eyes, memory, time. You settle back down. The ground beneath your bedding remains uneven despite the grasses placed there earlier. One stone presses against your hip. You move. Now another presses against your shoulder. After several attempts, you accept that prehistoric mattress technology has reached its limit for the evening. The hide above you smells strongly of smoke. That smell has become almost comforting. Smoke means fire. Fire means warmth. Fire means the center of the group is near. The temperature continues to fall. You pull the covering tighter around your chest. Human bodies are not especially well designed for cold nights without assistance. You have little body hair compared with many mammals. Your skin loses heat. Infants are vulnerable. Older people can struggle too. Shelter, clothing, bedding, shared warmth, and controlled fire turn environments that might otherwise be dangerous into places humans can occupy. Technology is not separate from survival. It creates the conditions in which survival becomes possible. A sound rises from the dark. Low, brief. Every adult who's still awake seems to notice. No one speaks at first. You listen again. Nothing. Perhaps a predator. Perhaps an animal moving near water. Perhaps something entirely harmless that becomes impressive only because you cannot see it. The uncertainty itself matters. Your eyes are less useful now. Hearing takes over. Smell matters more. The firelight creates a strange boundary inside it. Faces and hands remain visible. Outside it, you know there is a whole landscape but can see only fragments. A bush catches the light when the flames rise. A tree trunk appears, then both disappear again. This flickering edge can play tricks on perception. A shadow becomes movement. A stone resembles an animal. A branch looks briefly like a crouching person. You stare at one dark shape for several seconds before realizing it has not moved at all. You feel slightly foolish. No one notices. Or more likely, everyone has done the same thing. Predators were a genuine concern in many prehistoric landscapes. Large cats, hyenas, wolves in some regions, bears in others, and various dangerous animals shared territory with humans. Yet people were not helpless prey. A group gathered around fire, armed with wooden spears and stone-tipped weapons, was itself a formidable presence. The relationship between humans and predators could shift depending on numbers, location, species, and opportunity. Sometimes people avoided dangerous animals. Sometimes predators scavenged near human sites. Sometimes humans competed with them for carcasses or shelter. Caves, especially, could become contested spaces across generations. Bones from carnivores and humans found within the same cave do not necessarily mean everyone lived together in some deeply inconvenient arrangement. Occupation may have alternated. Humans used the place. Later, animals used it. Then perhaps humans returned. Layers accumulated thousands of years later. All of those separate nights appear compressed inside the same deposit. You think about that while listening to the darkness. A single campsite can contain many different moments that never overlapped. Archaeology places them near one another. Time originally kept them apart. The fire pops. You flinch slightly. A child wakes. An adult whispers something soothing. The child settles again. Sleep itself must be flexible here. Modern people often imagine 8 uninterrupted hours in a quiet bedroom as the natural human pattern. But sleep can vary enormously across environments and cultures. People wake, tend fire, check children, listen to animals, change position, talk briefly, return to sleep. There may be periods of wakefulness during the night without anyone considering them unusual. You close your eyes. For a while, sound becomes more vivid. You hear someone breathing beside you. A distant owl or similar nocturnal bird calls. Dry grass shifts in the wind. An insect lands somewhere near your ear and immediately becomes the most important creature in the entire Pleistocene. You wave it away, it returns. Apparently some aspects of nature need no historical reconstruction. Eventually it leaves you alone. You begin drifting towards sleep. Then a hand touches your shoulder. Your eyes open. Someone nearby points toward the fire. The flames have fallen low. Only a few embers remain bright. An adult rises and adds small pieces of dry wood. They do not build a roaring blaze. Just enough. The embers catch. A narrow flame appears. The night contracts again around the circle of light. Maintaining fire through darkness is easier when people can preserve embers rather than produce flame from the beginning each morning. Ash itself helps. A thick covering can insulate hot coals and slow their cooling in the morning. Those surviving embers may be uncovered and fed with dry tinder. A fire can therefore sleep too, in a sense, not extinguished, not fully awake, waiting. You watch the new flame for a minute. No one records whose turn it is to tend it. Perhaps people have habits. Perhaps certain adults wake more easily. Perhaps the person closest simply notices. Daily cooperation often depends on countless tasks too small to become rules. You wonder what people tell one another at night. This is where the prehistoric record becomes almost completely silent. Stories would be perfect tools for carrying information. A dangerous river could become part of a remembered tale. An animal encounter could be retold. A route could be embedded in a narrative. Ancestors could be remembered through repeated stories. Warnings could be made memorable. But no story spoken here can survive directly for 80,000 years. Language evaporates as soon as it is heard. All you can recover much later are indirect signs that these people possessed minds capable of tradition, symbolism, planning, and complex social learning. You open your eyes again. Someone is speaking softly near the fire. Perhaps it is a story. Perhaps tomorrow's plan. Perhaps a complaint about the sleeping arrangement. You cannot know. The uncertainty feels different now. Less frustrating. More intimate. Not every lost thing needs to be recovered to have existed. The fire grows quiet once more. Above you, stars continue their slow movement across the sky. The group around you settles deeper into sleep. A few people remain half awake, listening. The darkness beyond the camp is still enormous, but it no longer feels empty. Animals move through it. Wind reshapes it. People imagine things inside it. And here, beneath hides that smell of smoke, you begin to understand that prehistoric night is not merely the absence of daylight. It is its own world, a world of listening, waiting, remembering, watching embers, and trusting that when morning comes, the familiar landscape will appear again. Morning returns so gradually that you first notice it in the sounds. Bird calls begin before the light reaches the ground. One voice answers another from the trees. The night insects fade. Someone near the fire moves ash with a stick. A child wakes and immediately begins searching for something misplaced before sleep. You open your eyes. The stars are gone. The landscape has returned. It is tempting to think that what matters most in this world is what you can touch. Stone tools, wooden shafts, hide coverings, ochre, bones, fire, food. Those are the things that leave traces. They're also the things future archaeologists can study. But as you sit up and watch the group wake, you realize that much of the most important technology around you has no physical form at all. Knowledge. You cannot hold it. You cannot bury it. You cannot place it in a museum. Yet almost everything happening around you depends on it. Someone already knows where the next water source lies. Another person remembers where good stone can be found. A third recognizes which plants should be gathered this season. The older companion near the fire knows how the weather usually changes when a certain wind begins. The children know who is safe to follow. Everyone knows something about everyone else. None of that knowledge has been written down. There is no map hanging inside the shelter, no notebook, no carved sign pointing toward water. Memory carries the landscape instead. You follow one adult a short distance from camp. They point toward a ridge barely visible through morning haze. Beyond that ridge, they indicate, lies a route used before, perhaps months ago, perhaps years. You cannot know the words, but you understand the confidence. They have been there, or someone told them about it. Either way, Information has traveled without paper. That ability allows human groups to operate across territories far larger than what one person can see at any moment. A remembered route can connect water sources. A remembered season can tell you when animals pass. A remembered storm can change where you choose to sleep. This invisible archive is constantly being revised. People forget details. People disagree. People add new observations. Children learn older routes and later discover alternatives. Knowledge is alive because the environment is alive too. A spring can dry. A tree can fall. Animal patterns can shift. The most useful memory is not a fixed list. It is a flexible system. You stop near a patch of plants. The adult points to one species, then another. One is useful, one is ignored, perhaps dangerous, perhaps simply not worth gathering. The distinction could save time or prevent illness. You try to memorize the leaves, shape, color, texture, location. Immediately you see the problem. There are many plants, many tracks, many stones, many seasonal changes. A person growing up here has years to absorb them. You've had only a few imagined days. The amount of information required for ordinary prehistoric life is enormous. Modern people often describe early technology as simple because the surviving objects can be simple. A flake has no moving parts, a wooden spear has no electronics, but the tool exists inside a complicated web of knowledge. Which stone works best? Where is it found? How should it be struck? Which wood makes a strong shaft? When should it be cut? How should it dry? What kind of adhesive holds the point? How close should you approach an animal? Where will that animal move when frightened? The object is simple only if you ignore everything needed to use it. You return toward camp. Several people are talking. One points toward the sky, another shakes their head, a third looks toward the distant hills. Perhaps they are discussing weather, perhaps travel, perhaps nothing so practical. This is where the past becomes especially quiet. You can infer that communication is happening. You cannot recover the conversation. Spoken language is among the greatest missing archives in human history. Every sentence spoken here disappears almost instantly. The sound reaches another person. Then it is gone. No fossil remains, no charcoal layer, no cut mark on bone. Only consequences survive. A coordinated hunt, a taught skill, a shared route, an agreed movement of camp. These may reflect communication even when the words themselves are unrecoverable. Language almost certainly has deep evolutionary roots, but reconstructing its exact form 80,000 years ago is difficult. Anatomy can provide clues, genetics can provide clues, behavior can provide clues, none offers a recording. The question is not simply whether people could make sounds or use symbols. The harder question is how complex their grammar, vocabulary, storytelling, and abstract conversation had become. Any confident answer quickly outruns the evidence, so you listen instead. A short exchange near the fire, a laugh, a warning called toward a child, a response from someone carrying water. The voices already seem woven into everything. You notice another invisible technology. Names. You do not know what anyone here is called. But it is difficult to imagine a functioning social group without ways to identify particular people. Names could connect individuals to kin, stories, reputation, obligation, memory. Someone might be remembered for finding water during a drought, someone else for being an exceptional tool maker. A person can become a social archive simply through what others remember about them. None of those names survives for you. That loss is immense. Millions of prehistoric people lived complete lives without leaving a single personal name recoverable today. They loved particular people, disliked particular people, had favourite places, feared certain animals, told jokes, remembered childhoods, made mistakes, changed their minds. Almost none of them individually. History becomes strangely anonymous before writing, and yet anonymity should not be confused with simplicity. You watch the older companion again. A child sits beside them. The older person draws a root in the dust with one finger, a curved line, a pause, a mark beside it, then another. Perhaps it represents a river, perhaps a ridge. Perhaps you're imagining too much. The child watches carefully after a moment. The hand brushes the marks away. There goes the map, but perhaps not the knowledge. The child has seen it, maybe heard an explanation. Maybe tomorrow they will walk the route. Memory has moved from one person to another. That transfer is the real archive. There are other things you cannot see clearly either. Humor, rules about sharing, expectations about relationships, ways of settling disagreements, stories about the dead, beliefs about animals, dreams, superstitions, songs, rhythms, perhaps dances. The archaeological record can occasionally hint at music or ritual in later periods, but for a world this old, much remains almost completely inaccessible. You should resist filling every silence with certainty. That does not make the silence empty, it makes it human. You pick up a stone flake near the fire. The artifact feels solid, safe, knowable. Its edge can be measured, its material identified, its production method studied. Then you look at the people around it. Their real world is much larger than the object. The flake exists because someone remembered how to make it, because someone learned from another person, because a group knew where the stone came from, because a task required an edge, because people shared a system of meaning around work, ownership, use, and teaching. The physical artifact is only the visible tip. Most of the culture remains underneath, invisible. As the morning warms, the group prepares to move through another ordinary day. Someone laughs again. A child answers. A tool changes hands. A route is discussed. No one realizes that nearly all of these moments will vanish. You do. And for that reason, they suddenly seem precious. The deepest part of prehistoric history may not be what survives in museums. It may be everything that did not. The day opens quietly. No great event announces that you have reached the end of your journey. There is no monument, no city wall rising beyond the trees, no field of grain, no temple, no written date carved into stone. Only morning, smoke lifting from the fire, a child waking beneath a hide, someone drinking water, someone examining the edge of a tool, someone else looking toward the horizon and deciding where the group should walk next. You stand near the edge of the camp and watch them. After everything you have seen, the world of 80,000 years ago no longer feels empty. It feels full of roots you cannot see, names you cannot hear, relationships you cannot reconstruct, memories that will disappear, skills that exist inside hands and minds rather than objects. The word civilization would mean nothing here. Agriculture lies tens of thousands of years in the future. Permanent towns have not appeared. There are no governments collecting taxes, which may be one advantage your prehistoric companions would appreciate if anyone could explain taxes to them. There are no armies organized by states, no merchants keeping written accounts, no roads connecting cities, and yet almost none of the qualities that make human life recognizably human are absent. People cooperate, teach, remember, plan, share, move, care for children, support injured companions, improve tools, choose colors, carry unusual objects, build relationships beyond their immediate camp, look into darkness and wonder what is there. That is what makes this distant period so important. Civilization did not suddenly create humanity. Human beings carried much of the foundation with them long before cities existed. You begin walking with the group, The trail is not visible to you, but several people know it. The morning air is cool, moisture rests on low plants. Your feet disturb tiny insects as you pass. A wooden spear moves gently against someone's shoulder. Another person carries a bundle of hides. The children are quieter than usual, still sleepy. This is not an expedition toward history. To them, it is simply another day. But you know what lies far ahead, eventually. Long after these people are gone, some human communities will begin cultivating plants more intensively. Animals will be domesticated. Settlements will remain occupied for longer periods. Villages will grow. Food storage will become increasingly important. Populations will rise. In some regions, towns will appear, then cities, systems of administration, writing, kings, taxes, markets, monuments, all the complicated machinery that later generations will call civilization. None of that happens soon. The distance between you and the first farming communities is still enormous. You could live 100 complete lifetimes and remain nowhere near them. That scale is difficult to feel. Modern history often compresses the past. Ancient Egypt seems unimaginably old. The first cities seem almost beyond reach. Yet from the viewpoint of this morning, even though civilizations belong to a distant future, the people beside you are living tens of thousands of years before pyramids, tens of thousands of years before Stonehenge, tens of thousands of years before anyone writes down a king's name. For most of human existence, there are no written records at all, and still life continues. Generations are born, languages change, groups move, technologies spread, ideas appear and disappear. People adapt to climates that shift slowly across centuries and sometimes more sharply across generations. The late Pleistocene world will not remain stable. Cold phases will deepen. Warm periods will return. Ice sheets will expand and shrink. Sea levels will change. Habitats will move. Animals will disappear from some regions and flourish in others. Human populations will respond, not with global plans, with local decisions: walk farther, stay near water, follow animals, return to a familiar shelter, meet another group, teach a child, change a tool. Those tiny decisions accumulate. You look at the people walking ahead. None can see the enormous historical consequences of ordinary adaptation. That may be one of the strangest truths in history. People rarely know when they're creating the future. They're usually trying to solve today's problems. A toolmaker wants a sharper edge. A parent wants a child to remember which plant is dangerous. A group wants to reach water before sunset. An injured person wants the pain in their ankle to ease. Out of countless ordinary needs comes change. The route begins descending toward a broad plain. Animal tracks cross the softer ground. Someone pauses to inspect them. Another person notices edible plants near a damp patch. The group slows already. The day is rearranging itself around opportunity. You recognize the pattern now. There is no rigid division between traveling, gathering, hunting, teaching, and observing. Life flows between them. A walk becomes a lesson. A stop becomes a meal. A footprint becomes information. A stone becomes a tool. A fire becomes a social space. A piece of pigment becomes something harder to define. Human adaptability is built from this flexibility. That may help explain how Homo sapiens eventually occupy such an extraordinary range of environments: deserts, coasts, forests, grasslands, cold northern landscapes, highlands, islands. The body alone does not solve every problem. Culture helps. Clothing extends tolerance for cold. Fire changes food and warmth. Tools amplify hands. Language carries information. Social networks allow materials and knowledge to move beyond one group. Memory turns unfamiliar terrain into known country. Human survival becomes increasingly dependent on accumulated culture, and accumulated culture has an unusual property. No individual needs to invent everything. You did not invent fire. You learned how to manage it. You did not discover every edible plant. Someone taught you. You did not personally explore every water source. You inherited directions. Knowledge can therefore become larger than any single mind. That is one of the bridges between this world and the civilizations to come, not a sudden breakthrough. Accumulation. One generation receives something, changes it slightly, passes it onward. Sometimes knowledge is lost, sometimes it spreads, sometimes a useful idea remains local, sometimes it travels hundreds of kilometers. The pattern is messy. Human progress is rarely a staircase. It branches, backtracks, pauses, begins again. Even the story of Homo sapiens is not a simple march toward dominance. Other humans continue to exist in parts of Eurasia. Neanderthals will survive for tens of thousands of years beyond the morning you're imagining. Other populations, known partly through genetics and fragmentary fossils, complicate the picture further. Interactions will include contact and interbreeding. Eventually, those other human populations disappear as distinct groups. Why that happened cannot be reduced comfortably to one cause. Climate shifts, population size, competition, assimilation, disease, ecological pressures, and simple demographic vulnerability may all have played roles in different places. There is no single dramatic scene where one humanity replaces another. The process unfolds across enormous distances and many generations. You continue walking. The group crosses a shallow stream. Cold water touches your ankles. Children splash more than necessary. An adult gives them a look that appears to have survived unchanged into the modern era. On the far side, everyone pauses briefly. You turn back. The stream reflects the morning sky. Footprints are already filling with water. By tomorrow, your crossing may leave almost nothing visible. That feels appropriate. Most human lives leave little physical trace. Yet history is built from lives that vanished almost completely. The people around you will never know that distant descendants may one day study tiny fragments of stone, pigment, bone, and charcoal trying to understand them. They would probably find some conclusions sensible. Others might amuse them, and there would certainly be things future researchers never guess correctly. A private joke, a favourite song, a family story, a child's nickname. The reason one particular shell was carried for years. Those details are gone, but the broader picture remains. These people are capable, social, observant, adaptable, inventive, not waiting for civilization to make them fully human. You climb the opposite bank, ahead. The group spreads slightly across open ground. The sun is higher now. Your shadow shortens. Someone calls to another person. A child runs forward. The older companion walks more slowly but steadily. The person whose ankle was injured days ago is moving better. Life continues. And perhaps that is the most important conclusion you can carry away from 80,000 years ago. Prehistory is not a waiting room. It is not an unfinished version of history. It is human history, immense, mostly unwritten, filled with ordinary days that mattered completely to the people living them. The path continues across the plain. But you do not need to follow it much farther. The sounds begin to soften. Footsteps against soil, grass brushing against legs, a distant bird calling somewhere beyond the water. You let the group move ahead. Their figures grow smaller in the warm morning light. The fire you slept beside is already far behind you. Soon its ash will scatter. Rain will soften the footprints. Hides will decay. Wooden tools will vanish. Names will disappear. But for a little while longer, you can imagine them clearly. the child watching an adult shape stone, the older person remembering a route to water, hands passing food across the fire, red ochre resting on fingertips, a hunter listening to the wind, someone waking during the night to protect a bed of embers beneath the ash. Small things, quiet things, the kind of things that rarely become famous history, and yet they carried humanity forward. So allow the landscape to become quieter now. The grass fades into darkness. The distant ridge loses its shape. Even the footsteps seem farther away. There is nothing you need to remember tonight, no dates to memorize, no names to keep straight. You can simply hold the image of that ancient fire for another moment. Warm light, soft smoke, people gathered close together beneath a sky crowded with stars. 80,000 years separate you from them, but the distance feels smaller beside the fire. Someone becomes sleepy. Someone adjusts a hide. Someone checks the embers one last time. And then the ancient camp grows still. The stars remain above it. The night settles gently across the valley, and the long human story continues quietly into the dark. Sweet dreams.